The day dawned bright over King's Landing, its warmth already radiating against the red stone walls of the castle. The gulls screeched over Blackwater Bay, swooping low in search of scraps amid the merchant ships that had come from every corner of Westeros. The city bustled early, teeming with its customary clamor. Cries from fishmongers hawking the morning's catch, the clop of hooves upon cobblestones, the rattle and scrape of carts filled with produce and steel. High above the grime and chatter, in the upper chambers of the Red Keep, Jon Arryn, Hand of the King, was wide awake. He had slept lightly, the way many older men do, though his mind was sharper than ever. This morning he stood by a window, resting his palms on the sill while surveying the sprawl of the city below. He drew a slow breath, inhaling the faint scent of salt water that drifted on the air. Whatever the day would bring, he was grateful for the small blessing that the gods had seen fit to grant him another sunrise. When word of King Robert's imminent arrival in the throne room reached him, Jon turned from the window. Duty called. Robert Baratheon had never been the sort to appreciate tardiness, nor to practice it himself in years past. True, the king had grown comfortable on the Iron Throne and heavier in the belly, but Jon Arryn remembered the man's youth, his tall frame and powerful arms, the thunder in his voice, and the unstoppable force of his warhammer during the rebellion. That memory, more than any present reality, kept Jon's respect for the king firmly intact. Jon adjusted the collar of his doublet, smoothed a wrinkle in his sleeve, and made his way through the labyrinthine halls. Servants scurried around him, attending to tasks large and small. A few paused to give polite bows. Jon smiled gently at them. Though Lord Arryn was not often given to displays of warmth, he made a point to remember names and show civility where others might display arrogance. His fatherly manner had earned him quiet admiration over the decades. Down a corridor lit by torches in iron sconces, he finally emerged into the main hall leading to the throne room. The heavy doors stood open, revealing the dais at the far end, where the Iron Throne loomed like a monstrous sculpture of swords and metal. King Robert sat upon it, though not as regally as one might imagine. He slouched with one leg slung over an armrest, wearing a bored expression while speaking to one of his advisors. The scattered lords and knights before the throne parted respectfully as Jon Arryn approached. "Ah, Jon," King Robert called from across the hall. He sounded more animated at the sight of his hand. "Come, come." Jon Arryn bowed. The gesture felt familiar, performed so many times since Robert had seized the throne from the Mad King Aerys II Targaryen. When Jon rose, the king lifted a hand in a beckoning motion. Jon moved closer, just in time to hear the last snippet of some lesser lord's complaint about an unpaid debt. Robert waved the man away with a dismissive grunt. "Your Grace," Jon murmured, leaning in. Robert's eyes glittered. "I hope you're not about to trouble me with details of governance, old friend. I'm in no mood for it. Speak quickly." Jon's lips twitched. "I fear the realm must press on, Your Grace, whether you're in the mood or not." Robert barked a short laugh. "Hells yes, I suppose so. You see why I need you, Jon. Without you, I'd be drowning in all this nonsense." His laughter waned, and a flicker of seriousness clouded his expression. "But we'll see to it later. For now, I want to feast, drink a few barrels of ale, and then maybe go hunting. I hear rumors of a monstrous boar in the Kingswood. I need to keep in shape, after all." He patted his bulging belly as he said it, drawing a wry smile from the onlookers. Jon Arryn remembered how the king had once been built like an oak, broad and towering, unstoppable in battle. Those days were behind him, but the memory of them, and Robert's singular charm, often won hearts. Jon nodded, careful to keep any disapproval from his face. "Of course, Your Grace. Will you be requiring my counsel before or after the day's diversions?" Robert sighed, rubbing a hand over his beard. "7 hells. After. Much later in the day. I'll send for you. There's some business about the realm's finances that I suppose can't be delayed." "Gods, how I loathe that talk." Jon dipped his head. "I stand ready, Your Grace." With an impatient wave, Robert dismissed him, barking out instructions to the other courtiers. Jon turned away from the dais, glancing only briefly at the figure who lingered near the foot of the throne. Petyr Baelish, Master of Coin. Littlefinger gave Jon a faint, knowing smile that never reached his eyes. Jon inclined his head in acknowledgement and left the throne room. His exit was slow, thoughtful. Robert's mention of finances had reminded Jon of the troubling sums in the realm's treasury. He had learned over the past months that the crown's debt was staggering, thanks to the king's lavish spending and the ambitious loans orchestrated by Petyr Baelish. With the Iron Throne's coffers perpetually low, every tournament, every feast, further drained the realm. Robert seldom showed concern, but Jon was not blind to the risk. And Petyr always seemed too pleased by the endless borrowing. Jon found himself wishing for a confidant, someone who could look at the puzzle from a new angle. Ever since Stannis Baratheon had left for Dragonstone, the King's Council was less balanced. Stannis, for all his sternness, had a mind for such matters. But Stannis had grown disenchanted, or so it seemed, seeing rot in the heart of the capital that others preferred to ignore. Jon exhaled softly. The realm needed another pair of honest eyes. Perhaps, just perhaps, he should write to Eddard Stark. If there was one man in Westeros who could be trusted with a secret as grave as the kingdom's potential ruin, it was Ned Stark. Yet, Jon had other suspicions swirling in his mind lately. Suspicions that made him uneasy and kept him awake at night. He had encountered something troubling in the royal genealogies, a question of lineage that cast a shadow on House Baratheon's claim. He had begun to dig into the children of Cersei and Robert. Their hair, their features, the old line from which Robert sprang. The truth of it pricked at the edges of his consciousness, elusive, horrifying in its implications. He wanted to be certain, needed more time. Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, would be the perfect ally in this. He was honorable to a fault and careful, yet determined once he set his mind to something. If there was any chance that the royal children were not Robert's blood, if the Lannisters were perpetrating some monstrous deception, then Jon could not stand idle. The matter would tear the realm apart if discovered too brashly. Only a man of Ned's integrity could be trusted with such knowledge. Still, Jon was alive and well. There was time. He would gather more proof before summoning Ned. The realm's stability hung in the balance. He took a winding path through the Red Keep, eventually arriving at his private solar. Inside, he closed the door with a gentle click. The midday sun shot beams of golden light through the windows, illuminating the tidy room with its shelves of scrolls and carefully bound ledgers. Jon let his eyes rest on a large tome lying open upon his desk, the lineages and histories of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms. The pages were well worn from his recent studies. There, recorded in immaculate script, were genealogies spanning centuries. He ran his fingertip lightly over the lines and paragraphs, stopping at the mention of House Baratheon. Black of hair, hair as dark as midnight, a trait that had endured for countless generations. The children of Lord Steffan Baratheon and his wife Cassana Estermont had followed that pattern. Robert, Stannis, Renly, all black-haired and dark of eye. And yet, the children of Robert and Cersei Lannister were all fair-haired, golden as their mothers. Certainly that could happen. But the longer Jon pored over these genealogies, the more doubts crept in. Even bastards fathered by Robert had inherited his black hair. One boy had sired a child with a woman in the Vale. Another rumor told of a girl in King's Landing, with her father's dark hair and bright blue eyes. And yet, none of Robert's supposed trueborn heirs bore even a hint of the Baratheon darkness. Jon closed the book softly. A hush filled the solar. His heart pounded. He resolved, then and there, to write to Ned Stark in secret. But he would not detail everything in a letter. Such matters were too dangerous to commit to parchment. He would only ask Ned to come south, using a plausible ruse. The king needed the presence of the Warden of the North. That was truth enough. Robert had been talking of traveling to Winterfell for months, though he never made the journey. Jon would press Robert to do it properly, or at least extend a formal invitation that Ned could not politely refuse. Yes, that would be best. He took up quill and parchment, letting the quiet envelop him. Slowly, methodically, He drafted the first lines, paying careful attention to avoid any direct mention of the Lannisters or their children. When he finished, he read the letter twice. It contained only enough to spur Ned's curiosity and concern. He sealed it with his personal signet, an eagle clutching a moon and falcon, the sigil of House Arryn, and tucked it in a plain leather pouch. He would have his most trusted courier deliver it by horse, with instructions to keep the matter discreet. That settled, Jon took a moment to rest in his chair, exhaling a tension he had not realized he was carrying. A bird outside the window gave a brief trill. He listened to it, letting his mind drift to thoughts of the Vale. Memories of high peaks, a boyhood spent amid cold winds. Lady Lisa, he frowned at that last thought. She had never truly found a place for herself in King's Landing, always anxious, always lamenting that the capital was no place for a woman reared in the peace and quiet of the Eyrie. She had borne him a son, though, little Robert Arryn, sickly though he was. Jon took his duty to them seriously, of course. Still, there was a shadow in Lisa's eyes that worried him. She seemed too easily swayed by the flattery of other courtiers, especially Petyr Baelish. But Jon pushed that from his mind for now. He stood and left his solar, letter in hand, determined to see it safely off. That same afternoon, a slight, sharp-eyed man with a neatly trimmed beard wandered the corridors of the Red Keep, wearing a small, confident smirk. Petyr Baelish preferred to take note of everything that went on in the castle. He made it his business to know which lords quarreled with which knights, which servants whispered about scandal, and which ladies found themselves short of coin and grateful for his discreet loans. He found that, with enough knowledge, one might persuade anyone to do nearly anything. As he stepped around a corner, he spotted Jon Arryn crossing the courtyard. The hand of the king was speaking quietly with a courier who clutched a letter as though it might bite him. Petyr raised an eyebrow. He adjusted his course and approached, smooth as a cat and smiling all the while. "My lord Hand," Petyr said, bowing his head. "You look busy this day." Jon Arryn turned, eyes narrowing just a fraction. "Little finger," he greeted. "Indeed, matters of the realm never rest. Good day." Baelish glanced at the sealed letter, but kept his expression one of polite curiosity. "If there's anything the Master of Coin can do to assist, you have only to ask. The Crown's treasury stands ready." "Well, as ready as it can," he added with a self-deprecating chuckle. Jon Arryn nodded stiffly, giving nothing away. "I will bear that in mind." The hand turned again and continued on his path. Petyr lingered a moment, letting his gaze follow Jon. There was something different about the man's manner, something quietly determined, almost urgent. Petyr tucked that observation away. Information was power, after all. The days passed. Whispers began to surface of an impending royal progress north, though no official announcement had yet been made. King Robert's appetite for hunting in the Kingswood distracted him, so the details remained unsettled. Court life, meanwhile, trundled on. The Lannisters dined, laughed, and moved about the palace with regal grace. Queen Cersei wore cold smiles for nearly everyone, though she did appear doting when accompanied by her children. Even so, there were rumors that the Queen and the Hand of the King were engaged in some silent dispute. It was not open animosity, but those who prided themselves on reading lips or faces perceived that her courtesy to Jon Arryn was growing increasingly brittle. Jon, for his part, continued to investigate subtle leads. In the library, he studied lineages and tomes of genealogies, cross-referencing traits of various noble houses. He had scribes quietly fetch him old family records from all corners of Westeros. When asked, he would claim it was for a new project to reorganize the royal archives. Some believed him, others shrugged, and a few raised eyebrows. Petyr Baelish, of course, heard the gossip. Why would the Hand concern himself so thoroughly with genealogies? Petyr sniffed a puzzle worth solving. One bright morning, Jon was poring over a dusty ledger in his solar when a gentle knock came at the door. The Master of Whispers, Varys, glided in, his soft slippers making no sound on the floor. He wore his customary robe and an amiable smile, his plump hands folded over his stomach. "My Lord Hand," Varys greeted. My little birds bring me all manner of news. I hear you've been quite the scholar of late. Jon lifted his gaze from the ledger. He regarded Varys calmly. As the Hand, it's my duty to be well informed. Of course, Varys responded mildly. Knowledge is a potent weapon in King's Landing, is it not? He let the question hang before continuing. We live in such interesting times. The realm is at peace, well, mostly, but beneath the surface, there are eddies of rumor, terrible rumors about the parentage of certain prominent individuals. Jon studied the Master of Whispers' face, searching for an angle. Such rumors would be treasonous if they were found to be baseless. Varys nodded in agreement. Oh, indeed, terribly treasonous. It is enough to place a man's head on a spike if he utters them openly. His fingers trailed along the back of a chair, as though caressing it. But should one be interested in verifying or disproving these rumors for the good of the realm, that might be a different story. Jon slowly closed the ledger. Varys, you have served under the Targaryens, now the Baratheons. You are cunning, but you say you serve the realm. If that is true, you will keep certain matters to yourself until the proper time, for the sake of the king's peace. I do serve the realm, Lord Arryn, Varys murmured, batting his eyelids innocently. I only wish to see the right men informed at the right time. If you ever have need of my little birds, I am at your disposal. Jon inclined his head politely, and Varys took that as the end of the conversation. The eunuch slipped from the solar as quietly as he had arrived. In his wake, Jon felt fresh unease. If Varys was on to him, who else might suspect that the Hand was unraveling the truth? He pressed his lips together. He needed to be careful, very careful. Still, he also needed confirmation. More importantly, he needed an ally he could trust. He prayed Ned Stark would soon arrive. Half a moon's turn later, word came that Lord Eddard Stark was on the King's Road, traveling south with a modest retinue. The news set Jon's heart at ease. He made certain that everything was in order. Ned's chambers in the Red Keep would be prepared, a formal welcome from the king would be staged, and a feast would follow. Robert, upon hearing that Ned Stark was coming, seemed elated. He clapped Jon on the shoulder, praising him for arranging what the king had been too lazy to do himself. Jon smiled thinly and allowed Robert to think the entire visit was the king's own idea. If Robert realized that the letter had been from Jon, he did not say so. It was enough that Ned was on his way, and that soon Jon would share the dreadful suspicion that had haunted him. The day Eddard Stark entered the city was unseasonably hot. The sun beat down mercilessly on King's Landing, and it seemed to cause tempers to flare. The cobblestone streets sizzled underfoot. Even the wretched stench from the harbor grew rancid in the noonday heat. The gates to the Red Keep were thrown open for Lord Stark, who rode at the head of about 50 men. Behind them came a few wagons carrying baggage and supplies. They were fewer in number than might be expected for a lord so highborn. But Ned Stark was never one for pomp. Jon Arryn and the king's household guard awaited Ned in the courtyard. Cersei stood at Robert's side, regal in green and gold silks. Beside her were Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen, the three golden-haired royal children. It struck Jon as he looked upon them. Not a trace of Baratheon black hair. They were undeniably Lannister in appearance. Beside Jon, Grand Maester Pycelle sweltered in his heavy robes, dabbed at his brow, and tried to look interested in something other than the sweat trickling down his face. Ned dismounted before the king, going to one knee in a show of respect. Robert boomed with laughter and practically yanked Ned to his feet, clasping him in a great embrace. Ned, by the seven, it's been too long. How is that frozen wasteland you call home? Ned smiled faintly, stepping back. As cold as ever, your grace. Thank you for having me. Robert turned to the queen. Cersei, you remember Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell. Cersei inclined her head, lips curved in a gracious smile that did not quite warm her emerald eyes. Lord Stark, she said softly. Jon watched the exchange with interest, but was soon distracted as Ned approached him. A flicker of relief passed across the older man's face. Lord Arryn, Ned said, bowing slightly. "It is good to see you looking well." Jon gave a small, warm smile. "And you as well, my boy. Or should I say my lord?" He placed a reassuring hand on Ned's shoulder. "We have much to speak of, you and I." That evening, after the ceremonial feast had concluded, and Robert had gone off in search of more drink and other amusements, Jon invited Ned to his solar. The corridors were quieter at night, though torches flickered in their brackets, casting dancing shadows against the walls. Ned followed Jon, occasionally nodding to passing guards or servants. When they reached the door, Jon opened it, revealing a modest space crowded with shelves of books and ledgers. Jon lit a couple of candles and gestured for Ned to sit. The younger man did so, looking around with curiosity. "You've been reading, I see." Jon took a seat across from him, clasping his hands in his lap. He studied Ned's face. Honorable, straightforward, not a man prone to artifice. "The realm is in a precarious place," he said without preamble. "You and I both care too much for Robert to let him remain blind to the dangers around him." Ned nodded slowly. "You mentioned in your letter there were urgent matters. I sensed something amiss. Does it have to do with the crown's debts?" he asked. Jon paused. "That is one concern," he allowed. "The spending is excessive. Baelish's loans and manipulations do not help. But there is more. I fear the Lannisters are entrenching themselves around Robert. Indeed, I fear they may be consolidating power in ways that undermine the king's position." Ned frowned. "Explain." Jon sighed. "We will speak plainly but carefully. Robert's children, Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, Ned, they do not look like Baratheons." He rose, went to the shelf, and pulled out the genealogies. "I studied the lineages of House Baratheon, House Lannister, and many others. The Baratheon trait for black hair is exceptionally strong. All known trueborn children with Baratheon blood have black hair, unless matched with some strongly distinguishing trait from the mother's side. But the children of Robert and Cersei are all golden-haired." Ned's face darkened. "You suspect that they are not the king's children? That the queen—" He trailed off, shock in his eyes. "Gods be good." Jon set the heavy book before Ned. "You can see it for yourself. There are other telling details, rumors. I have not yet confronted Robert, for the proof is circumstantial. But the pattern holds. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen are Lannisters through and through." Ned stared at the pages, his jaw clenched. "If this is true, the consequences—" Jon gave a grave nod. "It would mean that the king's heirs are illegitimate, and that the line of succession is in grave jeopardy. The Lannisters stand to gain everything if Robert is removed or if he meets an unfortunate fate. We cannot rule that out, and I suspect Peter Baelish has some role in this. I do not know if he is merely facilitating their financial dealings or if he's deeper in their schemes. But I believe we cannot trust him." Ned sank into silence for a time, eyes flicking over the genealogies, and then looking at Jon's notes. Finally, he straightened. "We must find undeniable proof." "Yes," said Jon. "We must, and we must do so quietly. If the queen suspects we know, she may move against us." Ned pressed his lips together. "You think they would kill you?" Jon considered that question. "If cornered, I believe Cersei Lannister would do anything to protect her children's claims. She might have a collaborator." He thought of Peter, of the sly glances, the subtle meddling. "We cannot be careless." Ned nodded firmly. "I will help you. We will find the truth. For Robert's sake and for the realm." Jon clasped Ned's arm in gratitude. "Thank you, my friend. I feared to do this alone." Over the next weeks, Ned Stark joined Jon Arryn in a subtle investigation. They walked the city in disguise at times, visiting blacksmiths, stables, and the seedier parts of Flea Bottom, searching for Robert's bastards. Indeed, Ned met one of them, a youth with dark hair and striking Baratheon features. They spoke only briefly, but it was enough to confirm that Robert's seed was strong, as the saying went. The difference between that boy and the golden-haired prince in the Red Keep was stark. Ned's convictions hardened. He began to notice the sly looks exchanged between Jaime Lannister and the Queen, The way their smiles carried an undercurrent of shared secrets. Jaime's manner often dripped with arrogance, but Ned read something else in his gaze. A watchfulness, protective where Cersei was concerned. On one occasion, Ned observed Jaime in the training yard. Prince Joffrey stood beside his alleged uncle, though in reality, Ned suspected it was father and son. The resemblance was uncanny once one looked for it. They collected scraps of information, though presenting it to Robert would be risky. Robert was not a man who handled betrayal calmly, especially from those closest to him. All the while, the tension in the capital thickened. The Lannisters eyed Ned Stark's presence warily. Peter Baelish seemed to pop up whenever it was least expected, offering sly jokes and a twinkle in his eye. Sometimes he shared bits of gossip with Ned, though always in a half-mocking tone. The Master of Coin was adept at weaving illusions. Jon noticed Lysa Arryn becoming more anxious. She pressed him to return to the Vale. Their son was weak, she said, and needed rest in a cleaner, safer environment than King's Landing. But Jon insisted that the stability of the realm demanded he remain in the capital. Lysa's discontent turned to fear when she perceived the rift that might emerge if Jon confronted Cersei. She had once been close to Cersei's circle, or so she believed, but the queen never truly warmed to her. Lysa fretted at every rumor. Jon found her nerves exhausting, and the strain between them grew. Still, Jon pressed on. One evening, he and Ned conferred in a small courtyard garden, away from prying ears. The moon was high and bright, casting silvery light on the stone paths. A fountain bubbled gently. They spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing around to ensure they were not overheard. "Robert has said he plans to tour the city tomorrow," Jon murmured. "It may be an opportunity to steer him toward evidence he cannot deny." Ned frowned. "What sort of evidence do you propose?" Jon hesitated. "If he sees one of his bastards with his own eyes, spitting image, black hair, the Baratheon look, he may realize the truth of it, but it must be done delicately. Robert's temper is legendary." Ned pressed his lips together. "Is that wise? It might make him lash out at us for pushing him into a corner." Jon shook his head. "We have no easy path. If we do not show him soon, the Lannisters may sense what we're doing. And if they strike first, we lose everything." He allowed a hint of weariness to creep into his voice. "I'm getting old, Ned. This secret weighs heavily. We must act." Ned eventually nodded. "I will stand by you, but we have to be cautious." Yet caution became increasingly difficult. The next morning, as the king led a small retinue through the city, Ned tried to maneuver Robert into crossing paths with that same dark-haired bastard. But the boy never appeared in the alleyway they had arranged. Baelish had gleaned knowledge of their plan from someone, or perhaps the Lannisters themselves were one step ahead. Instead, the king found a reason to veer off and share a drink with some old friends from the city watch. Ned and Jon exchanged troubled looks. Their chance had slipped by. Later that afternoon, as Ned parted ways with Jon, a cloaked figure approached him in the corridor. It was Varys, his face grave. "My Lord Stark," he murmured, eyes darting around. "Be careful. My little birds tell me you and Lord Arryn are seeking truths that could topple the pillars of the realm." Ned stiffened. "We only seek to do right." Varys nodded slowly. "But if you proceed rashly, you will end up corpses, and the realm will remain as it is. Tread carefully or not at all." Ned took the warning. He was no friend to Varys, but the man had a knack for survival. Ned confided the conversation to Jon that evening. Jon frowned, pacing in his solar. Varys is not one to speak so plainly without reason. The Lannisters must be stirring. And indeed stir they did. Whispers began drifting around court that the queen was displeased with the hands meddling. Jon Arryn tried to keep his composure, but in private, the burden weighed on him. Meanwhile, Robert seemed oblivious to the tension. He spent his days hunting or drinking. Cersei's forced smiles grew ever more brittle. Jaime Lannister watched from the periphery, leaning against pillars with a lazy grace, hand on the pommel of his sword. Whenever Jon walked by, Jaime would meet his gaze with cool confidence. The threat was silent but unmistakable. "Touch the queen or the children and you will answer to me." Petyr Baelish became a fixture at Robert's side whenever the topic of the crown's debt arose. He would offer the king easy solutions: another loan from the Iron Bank, or higher taxes on port fees, or other complicated financial instruments that soared above Robert's head. Robert, not one for numbers, waved it off. "Do what you must, little finger," he'd say. "Just keep the gold flowing." Ned took Jon aside after one such council session. "We should speak to Robert soon, before it's too late." Jon nodded, but there was a heaviness in his expression. "I agree. Let us find a way to do so privately. The next council meeting is in 2 days' time. Robert will summon us. We will request a private audience, and we shall present what we know." That was the plan. But the next morning, as the sun rose over a red sky, ominous as a wound, a scream broke the quiet of dawn. Servants rushed through the corridors, crying out that Lord Arryn had collapsed in his chamber. By the time Ned arrived, Jon had been set upon his bed, sweating and shivering, his breath ragged. Maesters clustered around him. Lisa was sobbing uncontrollably. Ned pushed through to Jon's side, dread flooding him. "Jon, can you hear me?" Jon's eyes fluttered open weakly. For a moment, clarity seemed to light them. He groped for Ned's hand, and Ned clasped it. "Ned," Jon rasped, "tell Robert the truth." He tried to speak more, but only a rattle emerged from his throat. Pycelle ordered some potion, and Lisa shrieked, demanding them to save her husband. Ned felt helpless, kneeling at the bedside. For hours, the maesters worked in vain. By the time the morning turned to afternoon, Jon's condition stabilized, but he was clearly very ill. Pycelle insisted it might be a fever from the summertime heat, or stress, or something else. Ned suspected poison, but who? Why would they do it now, of all times, after letting him live for so long? Lisa refused to let Ned near Jon once the immediate danger was past. She clutched her husband's hand, glaring at anyone who came close, tears streaking her cheeks. "He's had enough of this wretched city," she spat. "He's leaving with me. We'll go to the Vale at once. The Ares' fresh air will heal him." Ned wanted to protest, to keep Jon in King's Landing for more thorough investigation. But Lisa was hysterical, and Robert Arryn was wailing. Moreover, the king was nowhere to be found. He had gone off to the Kingswood again, hunting, ignoring the crisis at his own court. By the time Robert returned, Lisa was packing up, preparing to take a barely conscious Jon Arryn back to the Vale. Ned urged caution, but Lisa refused to listen. She had a retinue of Vale knights loyal to House Arryn. It was not Ned's place to physically prevent them from leaving. At last, Ned was forced to stand aside and watch as they bore Jon away on a litter, bound for the Vale. The older man drifted in and out of consciousness, seemingly unaware of what was happening. Lisa clutched her son close, hurrying them out of the Red Keep in a swirl of panic. In that tense farewell, Jon's eyes briefly met Ned's. A flicker of sadness passed between them. Jon tried to speak, but words failed him, and then he was carried out. Ned's heart sank like a stone. When Robert finally learned of the event, he was furious, roaring at the top of his lungs about how he wanted Jon to remain so the maesters could do their work. But Lisa was already gone, and Robert's anger soon turned to an ugly despair, culminating in a night of drunken rampage. The next morning, he announced in a hollow voice that Eddard Stark would be made Hand of the King in Jon Arryn's stead. Ned tried to refuse, citing that Jon was still alive, albeit ill, and that he might recover. But Robert would not hear it. The realm needed a hand now, he insisted, and Ned would serve or be branded a traitor. Ned knew it was less a threat than a reflection of Robert's frustration, so he bowed stiffly and accepted. And so Eddard Stark found himself in a position he never wanted, with the realm's secrets swirling around him and hostility brewing in the shadows. The Queen extended her official congratulations, her smile cold as winter. Jaime Lannister jested about the Honorable Wolf stepping in. Petyr Baelish only said, "How wonderful, Lord Stark, that we'll have the opportunity to work together more closely." He wore a grin that did not touch his eyes. Ned spent the following days reeling from the abrupt shift in power. Jon had not been poisoned in the traditional sense. He had not died, after all, but it was clear that his illness was more than natural. The timing was too convenient. With Jon out of the picture, the investigation he and Ned had pursued was stalled. Ned had the genealogies, but Jon's experience, his knowledge, his moral authority had been taken from the game board. Now, alone in the capital, Ned felt as though a noose had slipped around his neck. Nevertheless, Eddard Stark had never been the sort to abandon duty. Robert needed him. The realm needed him. He resolved to see the matter through. He would uncover the truth, and if the Lannisters were behind the scheme, and Peter Baelish too, he would root them out. Of course, life at court would not permit him to do so easily. The first official council meeting, called under Ned's handship, was a circus of competing interests. Pycelle droned on about the expense of maintaining the city watch. Peter Baelish proposed a new tariff on wine imports. Varys commented on rumors in the Free Cities. Renly Baratheon, the king's younger brother, made offhand remarks that the treasury could stand to sponsor more tournaments. The king slumped in his seat, looking bored until someone mentioned a possible melee. Then his eyes lit up. After the meeting adjourned, Ned tried to stay behind with Robert for a private word, but the king brushed him off, claiming he had a boar hunt to plan. Ned seethed quietly but held his tongue. If he confronted Robert at the wrong moment, Robert's fury might boil over. Ned needed calm. He decided to approach the queen instead, perhaps glean some insight into her thoughts. He found her in the gardens, standing amid a row of rosebushes with Myrcella and Tommen. Joffrey was off at his lessons, presumably with the master-at-arms. Ned stood a respectful distance away, waiting to be acknowledged. Cersei turned, her golden hair catching the sunlight. She arched one brow. "Lord Stark," she said, her voice level. "I hear congratulations are in order." Ned inclined his head politely. "I serve at the king's pleasure, your grace." A faint smirk tugged at her lips. "Indeed you do. It must be strange for you, a Northman, to dwell in this snake pit of a city." "I go where honor compels me," Ned answered evenly. "And you, my queen, how fare you with Lord Arryn's sudden departure?" Something flickered in her eyes. It was quite unexpected. Such a pity, truly. She moved gracefully along the rosebush, lightly touching a blossom. "But we must trust that the gods know their will. Jon Arryn was an old man. People fall ill in old age." Ned watched her expression. There was no sorrow there, no worry, simply a calculating gleam. "I hope he recovers," Ned said. "He served the realm well." Myrcella and Tommen busied themselves chasing a butterfly. Cersei smiled indulgently at them, then turned back to Ned. "And do you intend to serve the realm as well, Lord Stark?" The question held a subtle challenge. Ned met her gaze without wavering. "I do." Her lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Then you and I have much to discuss, I'm sure." She turned her head, calling softly, "Children, come. We mustn't be late for your lessons." Ned watched them depart, the children giggling, the queen ushering them along like a lioness with her cubs. Once they were gone, the garden felt cooler. Ned exhaled, releasing tension he hadn't realized he was holding. He recalled the genealogies in his quarters: Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, all with golden hair. The mother's hair. The father's? Jaime Lannister, in all likelihood. Later that evening, Ned pinned his hopes on a private dinner with the king. Robert finally agreed to meet him in the council chambers after the day's business. Ned arrived early, restless, pacing near the table. He had the genealogies locked in a chest. He wondered if he should bring them out or simply rely on his memory. He was no diplomat, but he had to attempt some tact. He needed to persuade Robert to see the truth, or at least investigate. Otherwise, all might be lost. The door swung open, and Robert entered, flanked by two guards who remained outside. He removed his crown and set it heavily on the table, running a hand through his thick black hair. "Gods, Ned, I am worn out." If I'd known sitting a throne would be this tedious, I might have let the Targaryens keep it. Ned forced a small smile. You say that, but we both know you fought too hard for it. You'd never have turned back. Robert gave a short bark of laughter, then slumped into a chair. Fair enough. Now speak. You wanted me here. Let's have it. Ned took a deep breath. Your Grace, I'm concerned about the Lannisters. Robert cut him off with a groan. 7 hells, Ned. We've spoken of this before, or at least Jon did. He said something about the crown's debt and how Tywin Lannister is a creditor. Are we that badly in the red again? Worse than you know, Ned said quietly. But that is not the only matter. Robert, listen to me. This might be difficult to hear. It concerns your children. The king fixed Ned with a sharp look. What about them? Ned felt the words catch in his throat. How to speak them? They do not share your looks, your Grace. You are a Baratheon through and through, black of hair. But your son, your heirs. Robert's face darkened as though thunder rumbled across it. They have their mother's coloring, that is all. Some families breed true. Not the Baratheons, Ned said carefully. I have studied the lineages. Every child born of a Baratheon is black-haired. It is known, Robert. The king slowly rose from his chair. What are you suggesting? His tone was low and dangerous. Ned braced himself. I fear that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen are not your children. They might be Jaime Lannisters. There. The words were out. Robert stared at Ned, stunned, rage building behind his eyes. His fists clenched at his sides, and for a long heartbeat, Ned thought the king might strike him. He saw Robert's face contort with an agony of betrayal. Then, with a furious roar, Robert upended the table. Plates and flagons crashed to the floor, scattering food and drink. Ned recoiled, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Lies, Robert thundered. You, Jon. Did he poison your mind with this nonsense? Ned tried to stand his ground. Jon found the same conclusions, your Grace. He suspected foul play. Why else would he have written to me, insisted I come? Why else would he become so ill so suddenly? Robert was panting, face red, eyes wild. Are you calling my wife a whore? My children, I love them. He pressed a hand to his forehead, then slammed it against the wall. By the gods, if this is true. He broke off, choking. His voice dropped, trembling with fury. If this is true, I'll kill them all. Ned moved closer, wary. Robert, calm yourself. I share this only to protect you from a greater betrayal. Cersei may be plotting. Out, Robert bellowed, pointing at the door. Leave me. Now. Ned hesitated, pained to see his friend in such turmoil. But he bowed his head and backed away, stepping over the scattered plates. As he left the council chambers, he heard Robert's anguished shouts echo behind him, the sound of more furniture crashing. The guard stationed outside glanced at Ned, uncertain, but he shook his head. Let him be, Ned muttered, and they complied. From that moment on, everything changed. The king was scarcely seen for 3 days, locked away in his rooms or out, drinking himself into oblivion at the city's rougher taverns. Rumors ran rampant through the court. Ned kept his silence, uncertain if Robert would confide in him again or if he would brand Ned a traitor for speaking such words. Meanwhile, Cersei paraded through the Red Keep as though nothing were amiss, though Ned noticed the constant presence of Lannister guards around her. Jaime was never far away. On the 4th day after Ned's revelation, Robert emerged from his chambers unexpectedly, looking haggard and hungover. He summoned Ned to join him on a walk through the royal gardens. The morning was hot, a haze of summer humidity pressing down. Ned found Robert leaning on a railing overlooking the Blackwater. The king's eyes were bloodshot, and a faint stubble grew along his jaw. Walk with me, he muttered, not meeting Ned's gaze. They traversed the gravel paths amid hedges and statues. Birds twittered overhead. For a time, neither spoke. Then Robert said, voice rough, if they are not mine, then what am I? A fool? A cuckold? The entire realm will laugh at me, Ned. Ned swallowed. I do not laugh, my friend. Robert's laugh was hollow. No, I suppose you do not. Jon Arryn, he suspected this. That old hawk. I thought he was prying into petty details. He passed a hand over his eyes. I should have known something was wrong when he kept insisting on reading those dusty tomes about lineages. Ned kept his tone low. What will you do now? Robert let out a heavy exhale. I don't know. If I confronted Cersei openly, it would be war. Tywin Lannister would march on King's Landing. And the children? He trailed off, shaking his head. Even if they are not mine, they are still children, Ned. This is a monstrous betrayal, and I thirst for blood. But, he inhaled shakily, I cannot bring myself to order their deaths. Not yet. Ned placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. Then gather your allies. Jon Arryn still lives, if only just in the Vale. You have me, you have other loyal men. But you must act swiftly to secure the throne if you wish to avoid a bloodbath. We must find a way to unmask the Lannisters' treachery. Then you can set the succession in order properly. Robert turned haunted eyes toward Ned. Set the succession. Gods, that means Stannis. My brother, he will want the throne, and he might be the rightful heir, but do I want that stern man ruling? Ned did not answer. They both knew that Stannis, for all his unyielding nature, might well be better for the realm than any more of the Lannister stranglehold. The king sighed again. We'll gather the council, those we trust, but not all at once. Quietly. I want Baelish out of my finances if he's working with the Lannisters, and I need to see Tywin Lannister's reaction if I publicly demand his presence in King's Landing. Perhaps I can gauge if he knew all along. The man is as proud as any lion. Ned listened, relieved that Robert had not turned on him. Still, an undercurrent of dread prickled at Ned's spine. He felt the swirl of forces around them. Varys's webs, Baelish's manipulations, Cersei's cunning, Jaime's sword. The city was a tinderbox, ready to erupt. And somewhere, Jon Arryn lay ill in the Vale, possibly drifting closer to death. If he died, or if he recovered only to be cut off from the capital, the realm would lose one of the few men who might guide Robert with a steady hand. They parted ways, each weighed by the gravity of the secret. Ned returned to his duties as Hand, forging alliances with men like Barristan Selmy of the Kingsguard, who had served under the Mad King but proved loyal to Robert afterward. Selmy was honorable, if somewhat unaware of the intricacies of court politics. But if war broke out, Barristan was a good man to have at one's side. A day later, as Ned sat in the solar that had once belonged to Jon Arryn, a messenger arrived bearing a letter. The seal was from the Eyrie, House Arryn's Eagle and Falcon. Ned tore it open hastily. Inside, in Lisa's trembling script, was a desperate request. Jon is no better. The maesters say the poison is of an unfamiliar type, slow-acting. They do not know if he will recover. I beg you, do not trust the Lannisters, do not trust Peter. Flee if you can. Protect Robert's life. The realm is in danger. Ned's hand shook as he read it. So Jon had indeed been poisoned. Slow-acting, a cunning approach to remove him from the board without arousing immediate suspicion. Now Lisa was alone in the Vale, fearful. The letter also mentioned Peter by name, which did not surprise Ned. Littlefinger was from the Vale and had once fostered with House Tully. He had known Lisa as a girl, might have manipulated her in some way. Ned read the letter again carefully. Lisa was urging him to flee, but he was now Hand of the King. He could not simply abandon Robert. If the realm was in danger, he had to act. But how? He rose, intending to seek out Robert, but a knock came at the door. Enter, Ned said, quickly folding the letter. Peter Baelish stepped in, smiling thinly. His eyes flicked to the letter in Ned's hands. Am I interrupting something, Lord Stark? Ned forced a calm expression. No, I was just finishing some correspondence. Peter nodded, though the curiosity in his gaze was plain. I came to inform you that the king is calling a small council meeting. He wishes to discuss certain matters of court. His tone was carefully neutral. We will convene in 1 hour. Ned studied Littlefinger's face. He saw no telltale sign, only a smug, unreadable countenance. "Very well," Ned said. "I'll be there." Peter lingered a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then he bowed with a flourish and departed. The letter from Lisa Arryn felt like a weight in Ned's hands. He decided not to leave it lying around. Instead, he stashed it in a secret compartment of Jon Arryn's desk, locking it with a small key. If Peter or anyone else tried to pry into it, they would find the compartment well hidden. An hour later, Ned made his way to the council chambers. Robert was already seated, looking grim and wearing his crown askew. Varys stood off to the side, hands folded. Pycelle was there, blinking owlishly. Peter Baelish sat calmly, fingers steepled. Renly Baratheon was absent. Ned took his place. Robert cleared his throat, glaring at each of them in turn. "We are missing some men, but I will speak anyway. Matters must be addressed. My hand and I have discovered troubling news that concerns the realm's security." His voice was rough, and he refused to meet Peter's eyes. "I have decided to send word to Lord Tywin Lannister, commanding him to come to King's Landing at once. If he refuses, I will interpret it as defiance of the crown." A flicker of alarm crossed Littlefinger's face, gone in an instant. "Your Grace, might that not provoke the Lord of Casterly Rock?" "Provoke him?" Robert snarled. "I am the king, am I not? If I summon one of my lords, he should come without question. Or is Tywin Lannister above my authority?" Peter lowered his head. "Of course not, Your Grace. I only meant to suggest that the timing may cause tension. The realm is at peace," Robert said bitterly, "and I would know that my lords are loyal. Tywin will come. As for the finances, Baelish, you will deliver a full account of the crown's debts by the morrow. I want to see every coin. No more secrets, no more excuses." Peter nodded smoothly, though Ned saw a tightness in his smile. "As you wish, Your Grace. Shall I also arrange a private audience with Lord Tywin upon his arrival?" "You may," Robert said, "if he arrives. Meanwhile, I want the city watch on alert. We must not be caught unawares by anything." He glanced sidelong at Ned, who inclined his head in a silent show of support. Varys cleared his throat softly. "Your Grace, if I may, might we inquire after the Queen's wishes in this matter? Surely she will have her own opinions on her father being summoned." Robert's jaw clenched. "I shall speak to Cersei in my own time," he growled. "This meeting is concluded." With that, he stood and strode out, leaving the rest of them to trade tense glances. Pycelle gathered up his parchments and shuffled after the king, mumbling about whether the queen should be informed. Varys bowed politely and withdrew, face as unreadable as ever. Ned moved to follow, but Peter caught his arm with a delicate hand. "Lord Stark," he said quietly, "the king seems troubled. I wonder who might be the cause of it." Ned looked him in the eye. "He is the king. His troubles are the realm's troubles. I expect you to do your duty and provide the financial records as asked." Peter's lips curved in a cat-like smile. "Of course, the crown's finances are at your disposal. I have nothing to hide." His tone dripped with false sweetness. "I do hope we can continue to trust each other in these difficult times." Ned gently removed Baelish's hand from his arm. "Trust is earned, Lord Baelish," and he left the council chambers. Thus began a fraught period of waiting. Messages were sent to Lord Tywin at Casterly Rock. No immediate reply came. King Robert grew restless and angry, and the tension between him and the queen was palpable. She appeared at feasts, regal in her golden dresses, but the two seldom exchanged words. Jaime hovered near, watchful, arrogant as ever. Behind the scenes, Ned took additional precautions. He posted guards he trusted outside his chambers and near the king's rooms. He convened quietly with Barristan Selmy, who listened gravely to Ned's hints of betrayal at the highest levels. Selmy pledged his sword to the king and to the realm. Meanwhile, Varys flitted about in his usual manner, sometimes dropping cryptic comments about hidden daggers in the dark. Ned believed that if a coup or violent confrontation was coming, it could erupt at any moment. 2 weeks later, a raven arrived from the Vale. Jon Arryn's condition had stabilized somewhat, but he was weak and unable to travel. The maesters believed the poison had run its course, leaving him alive but frail. He drifted in and out of clarity. Lisa's letter expressed heartbreak and confusion. If indeed it had been the Lannisters or their agents who tainted Jon, they had not finished the job. Or perhaps something had gone awry in their plan. Regardless, Jon Arryn remained a living threat, if he recovered enough to speak. In that same stretch of time, Tywin Lannister's reply arrived, coldly stating that pressing matters at Casterly Rock prevented his immediate travel, but that he would come at the king's summons when his obligations permitted. It was not an outright refusal, but hardly a show of compliance. Robert fumed, smashing a goblet against a wall when he read it. He raged that Tywin was all but refusing to kneel. Ned tried to calm him. Meanwhile, the city seethed with undercurrents of rumor and fear. Soldiers loyal to House Lannister patrolled discreetly, wearing the red and gold lion sigil. The city watch was tense, uncertain who truly commanded them. Ned had spoken with their Lord Commander, Janos Slynt, but the man was as slippery as an eel, always sniffing out a bribe. Peter Baelish quietly pressed coins into certain guards' palms, making them beholden to him. Ned tried to counter this by stationing his own men from the north in key positions, but the numbers were not in his favor. Among the common folk, talk spread that the king was at odds with his queen, that the new hand was stirring trouble, that something was rotten within the Red Keep. Whispers of the old Targaryen days surfaced. Some claimed that if the realm was to fall into civil war again, the rightful Targaryen heirs might attempt a return from across the narrow sea. Ned paid these rumors little mind, but he knew that Daenerys Targaryen was rumored to be alive in the east with her brother Viserys. Another complication for a troubled realm. Each night, Ned slept less and less. He felt the tension coil in his chest, the foreboding that everything was about to burst. He pressed Robert to act decisively, either to arrest Jaime and question him, or to force the queen to speak. But Robert vacillated, paralyzed by anger and heartbreak. Then, under the scorching sun of a late summer day, events came to a head. King Robert announced he would go hunting once more, to clear his mind. Ned pleaded with him not to leave the city in such a volatile state, but Robert only roared that he would hunt down this damned boar or else go mad. He organized a small party that included his brother Renly and several knights. The queen declined to join, and Ned could almost see the relief in her eyes. If Robert left now, he would be out of the capital, vulnerable. Ned tried to persuade the king to take a larger escort, but Robert dismissed it. "Afraid I'll be attacked by deer?" he joked sourly, ignoring the real threat. And so the king departed. That night, Ned sat alone in the hand solar, staring at a single candle flame. Outside, the city was alive with drunken shouts and distant music. Another lavish feast was taking place in the castle, but Ned had no taste for it. His men had reported that Jaime Lannister rode out not long after Robert, heading in a different direction, but close enough that if he wished to intercept the king, he could. Ned's gut churned. He suspected a trap. He had advised Robert to remain vigilant, but the king had not listened, and so Ned waited powerless. Varys had once told him that when you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. Ned took little pleasure in games, but he feared the outcome if the Lannisters made their move while Robert was away. For Jon Arryn, still lingering in the Vale, for the sake of the realm, Ned prayed the gods might protect them all. Morning brought frantic news. Robert Baratheon had been gravely injured. According to the few knights who returned, the king had faced down a monstrous boar in the Kingswood, but he had drunk too much wine and was gored before they could save him. They were rushing him back to the Red Keep, but his wounds were described as dire, possibly mortal. The entire court erupted into chaos. The queen's face was impossible to read, though Ned thought he detected a flash of something like triumph. Jaime had not been with Robert's hunting party, so suspicion turned to other possible conspirators. Some claimed it was an accident, that Robert had grown careless. Others whispered that the wine had been stronger than usual, that perhaps it had been laced with something. Ned felt the weight of despair. Without Robert, the realm would be a feast for crows. And if Joffrey sat the throne, illegitimate though he was, civil war might be inevitable. He rushed to the king's bedside as soon as they brought him in. Robert lay there, pale and feverish, a deep wound in his side. It reeked of infection. The maesters worked frantically, but the king was delirious with pain. He clutched Ned's hand, muttering half-coherent words. Ned bent over him, voice trembling. "Robert, hold on. For the love you bear the realm, hold on." Robert's eyes fluttered. His breath rattled. "Ned, you must protect the realm, my children." A spasm of pain racked him. I was a damn fool." The door opened behind them. Cersei entered with Joffrey at her side, along with a retinue of Lannister guards. Ned wanted to protest, but it was the queen's right to see her husband. She glided to the bedside, placing a hand on Robert's brow. He glared weakly at her. "You lying." Another spasm of agony cut off his words. Her expression was an artful mask of sorrow. She stroked his hair. "Show my love. The doctors will heal you." Robert grimaced, turning away. Ned stood by, helpless, rage coursing through him. He suspected everything was converging at this moment. Jaime's absence, Robert's mortal wound, the presence of the Lannister guards, Cersei's calm. The queen gestured, and her men parted as Peter Baelish entered, flanked by a pair of city watch captains. Littlefinger gave Ned a mournful smile. "Lord Stark," he said gently, "the king is in no condition to rule. We must ensure continuity." Ned's gaze flicked to Joffrey, who stared back with undisguised arrogance. The boy's eyes were alight with the prospect of being crowned. Ned could hardly contain his revulsion. "Robert is not yet dead," he said stiffly. Cersei's voice was quiet. "But he may well be by morning, and the realm needs leadership. My son is the rightful heir." Baelish offered a sympathetic sigh. "We would all do well to recognize Prince Joffrey as regent until the king recovers, or the worst occurs." Ned's voice trembled with barely contained fury. "Joffrey is no heir of Robert Baratheon. I will not stand by and let this farce proceed." The room froze. Joffrey's mouth twisted in confusion, then anger. Cersei's green eyes blazed, her breath quickening. Peter Baelish's expression turned icy, cunning. The Lannister guards shifted, hands on sword hilts. Cersei spoke with venom in her tone. "And who are you to deny my son's birthright?" Ned swallowed. He knew he stood on a precipice. "I am the hand of the king, sworn to protect the realm. I know the truth of Joffrey's parentage." Her face went pale, then flushed. Baelish's thin smile curved. "Truth, Lord Stark? Or a rumor?" Ned's fists clenched. He glanced at Robert, whose eyes were closed, sweat beading on his brow. "I have proof," Ned said quietly, though his voice shook with passion. "The genealogies, the match of traits, the children of Robert's bastards all share the Baratheon look. Joffrey does not, nor does Myrcella or Tommen." Cersei's eyes narrowed. "You dare call me an adulteress in front of my child?" Ned forced himself to remain calm. "I do not relish it, your grace, but neither will I let the realm fall into the clutches of a lie. If Robert dies, the rightful heir is Stannis Baratheon." A hush fell. For a moment no one moved. Then Joffrey shouted, voice cracking, "Guards, seize him!" He pointed at Ned. The Lannister men stepped forward. Ned's hand went to his sword, but Peter Baelish raised a hand, halting them. "Wait," he said softly. "We mustn't shed blood beside the king's deathbed. Must we?" "Not yet." Cersei's lips curled in a terrible smile. "Lord Stark will come quietly if he knows what's good for him. We will question him about these scandalous claims. He can provide his so-called evidence to the proper authorities." Ned realized, with cold certainty, that he was outmaneuvered. Robert might not last the night. Jaime was away, presumably waiting with an army. Tywin might be moving as well. And Jon Arryn, the one man who could stand beside Ned in condemnation of the Lannisters, lay poisoned in the Vale. Alone in the Red Keep with no loyal northern army at his back, he was at their mercy. He took a slow breath, eyes flicking to the king's still form. Duty demanded he fight for the truth. But the immediate fight here was futile. He let his sword hand drop. "I will come," he said quietly. "For Robert's sake, do not do this in his presence." Cersei gave a cool nod, turning to the city watch captains. "Escort Lord Stark to his chambers. Post guards at the door. He is not to leave without my permission." Baelish exhaled, then put on a look of pity. "I truly regret that it's come to this, my lord." Ned did not dignify him with a response. He glanced at Robert one last time, seeing the faint rise and fall of the king's chest. Then he allowed the gold cloaks to take him away, aware that the city around him might soon fall into chaos. If Robert died, Ned would be at the mercy of the Lannisters and Baelish. As he passed through the corridors under guard, Ned felt despair gnaw at him. But he remembered Jon Arryn's words in that fleeting moment of consciousness. Tell Robert the truth. He had done so, but fate had intervened. Yet the truth was out there, no matter what the Lannisters did. Even if Ned was silenced, perhaps Jon Arryn might recover enough to speak. Perhaps Stannis or Renly would gather forces. The future was uncertain, but Ned clung to one certainty. The Lannisters' hold on the throne was built on a lie. That night, he sat alone, locked in his chamber, listening to the faint sounds of the city. He wondered if he would live to see the morrow. If Robert succumbed to his wounds, the realm would teeter on the brink of civil war. And in the Vale, Jon Arryn battled a poison that had nearly claimed his life. Ned closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw the last memory he had of Jon Arryn standing strong in the Red Keep, eyes clear, mind sharp, wearing his chain of office with quiet dignity. If only that man had never been poisoned. If only he had remained to guide Robert and outmaneuver the Lannisters before they grew bold. But fate had taken another path, and now the dark consequences of that plot were unfolding. Somewhere out there, Peter Baelish smiled to himself, weaving new intrigues. Cersei Lannister plotted her next move, protecting her children's claim at any cost. Varys observed it all from the shadows, a silent puppeteer, and the realm once again stood on the precipice of bloodshed. Ned Stark, alone in a locked room, could only wait for the dawn, wondering if by daybreak he would be taken away in chains, or if the entire Red Keep would erupt in violence first. The Game of Thrones continued, an ever-tightening snare of treachery, with no certainty as to who would ultimately sit the Iron Throne. Yet one thing was clear in Ned's mind. Had Jon Arryn remained at Robert's side, strong and hale, the Lannister scheme might have been stopped before it truly began. Now, the city trembled on the edge of doom, and the path ahead was shrouded in the darkest of shadows. Ned Stark did not sleep. All through the long hours of that moonless night, he paced his cramped quarters, pausing only to listen at the door, half hoping, half dreading to hear news of King Robert's fate. The torch outside flickered beneath the watchful eyes of the gold cloaks posted there, men who would not hesitate to arrest Ned or kill him at the Queen's command. The Red Keep, which had been imposing enough when he first arrived, now felt like a cage. He had come south at Jon Arryn's urging, sworn to guard the king, to uncover the truth, to hold the realm together. Yet that truth was dangerously close to tearing everything apart. He touched the pommel of his sword, hanging in its sheath by the bed. They had not yet demanded he relinquish his great sword. The Lannisters, cunning as they were, must have believed it more humiliating and more expedient to confine him with the weapon still near, a cruel illusion of control. Or perhaps, Ned thought grimly, they simply intended to bring him out in public soon, only to strip his weapon before onlookers. A show of power could be the next stage of their game. The hours crept on. Now and then, a faint stirring echoed through the hallway, servants moving about, or a pair of guards changing their watch. No one came for Ned. He had no illusions that the silence meant safety. In King's Landing, silence could be deadlier than 1,000 swords. When at last the darkest portion of the night gave way to dawn's muted light, Ned sank onto the edge of his bed. Fatigue weighed on him, yet his mind churned with worry. How badly was Robert wounded? If he died, Joffrey would claim the throne unless the truth of his parentage came out swiftly and convincingly. But how would that truth even matter if Ned was locked away, cut off from allies? He swallowed hard, thinking of his daughters, Sansa and Arya, who had come with him. The memory of their innocent faces spurred him into a fresh wave of anxiety. Had the Lannisters seized them already? Or would Cersei wait until her claim was secure? Finally, near sunrise, booted feet stomped in the corridor. Ned's muscles tensed. The door swung open. 3 gold cloaks entered, and behind them stepped Lord Petyr Baelish, slim and well-dressed, his expression carefully composed in a mask of pity. "Lord Stark," Baelish said quietly, "the Queen requests your presence." Ned did not move at first. He studied the 3 guards, then Petyr, searching for any clue of deception or trap. But here everything was a trap. Still, refusing would do no good. He rose, buckled his sword belt, and inclined his head in cold acknowledgement. "Lead on," he said. Baelish gestured for the gold cloaks to stand aside so Ned could exit. The men fell in around him, their spears held upright, blocking any attempt at escape. Ned walked with his back straight, gaze forward, refusing to display fear. Petyr led the way. They descended 2 flights of stairs and entered a lesser hall. Not the grand throne room with its looming pillars, but a smaller, more intimate chamber for receiving visitors. It was still large enough to intimidate. Torches burned in sconces, and a dais at the far end bore the king's seat, an ornate chair, though a pale imitation of the Iron Throne. Queen Cersei stood before the dais, her emerald eyes keen and cool. Behind her, Jaime Lannister leaned against the wall in full armor, a casual hand resting on his sword's gilded hilt. Prince Joffrey stood at his mother's side, glaring at Ned with open loathing. A small gathering of Lannister retainers lined the walls, men in red cloaks, some wearing the Golden Lion sigil. Ned recognized a few from tournaments, skilled swordsmen and knights with questionable reputations. Over in one corner stood Varys, hands folded, expression unreadable. Pycelle was absent, and so was Renly Baratheon. The tension in the room pressed down upon Ned like a physical weight. He came to a stop several paces from the Queen, then went to one knee more out of caution than respect. If Cersei read it as submission, so much the better. Joffrey sneered. Jaime's eyes glittered, though his face remained calm. "You called for me, Your Grace," Ned said levelly, keeping his gaze lowered. Cersei's voice was mild. "You proclaim yourself Hand of the King, and yet you sow seeds of discord. My lord husband lies at death's door, wounded in a boar hunt gone tragically awry, and you choose this moment to spout treason about my children." Ned lifted his head. "I spoke only the truth." Jaime took a step forward, but the Queen held up a hand. "Sir Jaime," she said softly, "let Lord Stark finish his explanation." She stared at Ned. "Because I do hope he has a reasonable explanation, one that will not end with his head on a spike." Ned got to his feet slowly, ignoring the threatening murmurs from Lannister guards. "If the king dies, the rightful heir must ascend. That heir is Stannis Baratheon." Joffrey's face twisted with fury. "I am the king's oldest son." Ned met the boy's eyes. "Forgive me, Prince Joffrey, but you are not King Robert's son." A hush fell, broken only by the scrape of Jaime's armor as he clenched his jaw. Cersei's expression turned to ice. "Why do you persist in these baseless accusations? Do you think your name will protect you from a charge of high treason? Or do you think I will spare your daughters?" The mention of Sansa and Arya chilled Ned's blood, but he forced himself not to betray any panic. "I think the truth must be heard, no matter the cost." Cersei's nostrils flared. "Truth, that word is tossed around so easily. My children share my features. Is that so impossible? They do not resemble their father, but that happens sometimes." Across the room, Petyr Baelish made a small, thoughtful sound, but said nothing. Ned knew the man was weighing every word, every shift in the room, and silently calibrating which side to join. Varys, too, observed from the corner as still as a statue. "Your Grace," Ned said, voice quiet, "I have read the genealogies. For centuries, every time a Baratheon crossbred with another house, the dark hair prevailed, from the most ancient lines to the bastards fathered by Robert himself. The children Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen do not share that trait. They each have hair of gold. They are—" His gaze flicked to Jaime Lannister. "They are the product of your union with your brother." Someone gasped. A few knights cursed under their breath. Jaime's face burned red as he took another step forward, hand tight on his sword. But Cersei extended her arm again, halting him. She stood poised, gathering up all the pride of House Lannister. "You dare," she hissed. "In the presence of the royal court, you dare make these vile allegations." "They are not allegations," Ned said. "They are fact. I told Robert. Ask him if he is coherent enough to speak. Ask him what he believes now." Cersei's lips compressed into a line. For a moment, Ned saw fear flicker behind her eyes. If Robert had believed Ned, then it was no longer a secret. The rest of the realm would soon know. The Queen inhaled slowly, regaining her composure. She turned her gaze to Joffrey, and her voice, when she spoke, was calm. "Leave us, my sweet boy," she murmured. "Go to your rooms. I will join you shortly." Joffrey bristled. "Mother, Now," she snapped. The prince glowered but obeyed, retreating with stiff steps toward an antechamber. 2 young Lannister knights followed, presumably to guard him. When Joffrey was gone, Cersei regarded Ned in silence. Jaime hovered protectively at her side, his knuckles tight on the sword's grip. Varys cleared his throat from the corner. "Perhaps we might consider the king's condition before making any decisions. If his grace recovers, he will choose who is hand, who is heir, and who lives or dies." Baelish's eyes darted from Varys to Ned. "And if his grace does not recover?" Cersei's voice cut across them, quiet but sharp as a razor. "If he does not recover, the realm must not plunge into chaos. We have all labored to keep the realm at peace. If this baseless rumor gains circulation, it could spark civil war. House Lannister will not tolerate that." Jaime smiled thinly. "We will crush any rebellion in an instant." Ned studied them. They were attempting to wrap their treachery in the language of peace. "You would ask me to renounce the truth," he said slowly. "You would ask me to pretend that Joffrey is Robert's heir." Cersei's eyes flicked to Baelish. "Lord Baelish, you have a practical mind. Perhaps you can explain to Lord Stark why that is the wisest course." Peter Baelish stepped forward, hands folded behind his back. "Lord Stark, the realm is fragile. King Robert's health teeters. If he passes, there will be a vacuum of power. If you proclaim that the prince is not the rightful heir, the entire realm could erupt. Stannis Baratheon might rally some lords, but so too would the Lannisters, and they have the gold to buy many allies. War would mean thousands dead, towns burned, crops destroyed. Would you risk that for a child's hair color in an old book of genealogies?" Ned stiffened. "A child's hair color? You trivialize Robert's broken line of succession." Baelish sighed. "I only mean that the realm often runs on illusions. A peaceful illusion can be safer than a violent truth. Is it not better to protect the common folk by allowing stability to reign? You could serve as regent, Lord Stark, quietly guiding Joffrey to be the king he must be, and reaping the benefits of Lannister goodwill. Isn't that preferable to certain bloodshed?" Ned felt a surge of loathing. Baelish's words were dangerously enticing, laced with that cunning logic that often trapped good men in moral compromise. "I will not participate in a lie," Ned said. Cersei's lips curved in a predatory smile. "Then you place the realm at risk. My father, Tywin Lannister, is no man to cross lightly. Nor is Jaime, as you well know." Jaime chuckled darkly, his eyes flicking over Ned's sword. "We can solve this with steel, if you like." Ned's anger flared. He took a step forward, ignoring the gold cloaks who tensed at his sudden movement. "If it comes to that, I will not flinch." But Varys interceded, voice slippery and smooth. "My lords, my queen, Let us not spill blood here. The king is not yet dead. Please, let us all pray he recovers. If that miracle occurs, he can resolve this, and all your positions may be spared." He cast a knowing look at Ned. Impugning the queen's honor and that of her brother would be the gravest accusation. If the king awakens in rage and no longer trusts you, Lord Stark, you might find yourself in as precarious a position as the queen. Is it not wise to wait? A hush followed. Ned realized the Master of Whispers had set out a path that would buy time for everyone. If Robert survived and reaffirmed Ned's claim that Joffrey was illegitimate, the Lannisters would have to deal with Robert's wrath, not just Ned's. If Robert died, the Lannisters would be unstoppable in King's Landing, but they would have to quell the storm of rumors. Ned did not see a straightforward solution. He could refuse, demand an immediate hearing before the king, but Robert was half delirious. The maesters might keep him that way, or the queen might. At length, Ned exhaled. "I will do nothing that contravenes the king's direct orders," he said slowly, "until he is well enough to speak." Jaime smirked. "That sounds almost reasonable, Stark." Cersei's gaze remained frosty, but she inclined her head. "Then for your sake, I hope Robert recovers." She said it in such a tone that Ned suspected she hoped the opposite. "But I will not abide you roaming the Red Keep, spreading your lies. You will remain in your quarters under guard until the king's condition is determined." Ned bristled at the notion of house arrest but forced himself to nod. A direct challenge would only bring immediate confrontation, and he had so few allies here. He flicked his gaze toward Varys, but the man's face was unreadable. Baelish wore a mild look of regret, which Ned trusted not at all. Then the queen's voice turned cutting. "You may go. The gold cloaks will show you the way, in case you've forgotten." Ned turned on his heel, ignoring Jaime's smug grin. 2 guards stepped in behind him, guiding him out of the hall and back through winding corridors. He did not speak. No words would help, but his mind churned, searching for a plan. As they neared the stairwell that would lead back to his room, a faint clamor rose from somewhere in the castle. Ned could not see what was happening, but he thought he heard hurried footsteps, muttering voices. The gold cloaks slowed, exchanging uneasy glances. Suddenly, one of Ned's guards stiffened, then nodded to the other. "Wait with him," the first guard said, and left with quick strides down a side passage, presumably to investigate the noise. Ned stood in the corridor with the remaining guard, a stout man whose face was partially hidden by a helm. The moment stretched. Ned's pulse thudded in his ears. He considered the possibility of escape. He had his sword. If he could somehow disarm this one guard quietly, he might slip into the warren of corridors and find his daughters. But then he realized how foolish that would be. The Red Keep was crawling with Lannister men, and he had no idea where Sansa or Arya were being kept, or if they were guarded. Rash action would doom him and possibly them. He waited. The guard shifted, glancing at him occasionally. Finally, footsteps approached again. The first guard returned, his face pale beneath the helm. "We're to go straight to the king's chambers," he said in a tense whisper. "King Robert, he's woken." A shock of relief, surprise, and fear rippled through Ned. "He's awake." The guard nodded rapidly. "Aye, though just barely. The queen is heading there now. Orders say we're to bring Lord Stark as well." For one wild heartbeat, Ned wondered if Robert, in his moment of clarity, had demanded Ned's presence. Perhaps the king intended to set matters right, to stand up from his sickbed and denounce the Lannisters' treachery. But the pang of hope was swiftly followed by caution. Had the queen arranged this as a trap? Or did Robert truly want him? Ned had no choice but to comply. He walked with the 2 gold cloaks up a different staircase, heading for the royal wing. There, thick carpets muffled their footsteps as they navigated the labyrinth of hallways leading to the king's private rooms. The corridor outside was a flurry of movement. Servants bearing basins of hot water, maesters carrying herbs and bandages, knights pacing. They paused at the large double doors. Lannister guards stood at either side, but one stepped aside as soon as they recognized Ned. "The king has called for the hand," the guard said, pushing the door open just enough for Ned to slip in. The gold cloaks did not follow him inside. Within, the chambers were dim and reeked of sweat and sickness. Robert lay propped up on a tall, canopied bed, his face drenched in sweat, a bandage wrapped around his middle. His eyes flicked open, dull with pain. Cersei stood near the bed, wearing the same cold composure she had shown earlier. Pycelle was there, too, droning about poultices. 2 younger maesters hovered in the background, glancing nervously at the queen. Robert's gaze settled on Ned, and the barest hint of relief touched his features. "Ned," he croaked. He tried to lift himself upright, but a grimace of agony stopped him. Cersei laid a hand on his shoulder, an imitation of tenderness. "My love, please, you need rest." Robert's left hand shot up, knocking her arm away. "Don't call me that," he rasped. Cersei's face went rigid, but she stepped back, letting the maesters fuss with the bandages. Ned inched closer. He saw that Robert's eyes had a clarity in them, a burning anger behind his pain. He smelled wine on the king's breath. No doubt they were keeping him dosed. But there was an awareness, too, that the sedation had not fully smothered. "Ned," Robert said again, voice rough, "where is everyone? Jon Arryn, my old friend, he's gone." Ned's chest tightened. "He was taken away to the Vale when he fell ill," Ned said gently. "By Lady Lisa. He still lives, but is recovering." Robert winced, pressing his teeth together against the pain in his side. "I need him. Gods. I need someone I can trust." His eyes shifted to Cersei. "Not you." Cersei's lips pursed. "Your Grace, you are gravely wounded. Let me fetch the maesters." "Silence," Robert growled, clenching a fist. "Ned told me what you've done. What you and Jaime." A spasm ran through him, and blood showed at the corner of his mouth. "Gods, I was a fool." The queen kept her composure, though color fled her cheeks. The maesters stood frozen, uncertain how to proceed. Ned remained by the bedside, close enough to see the tremor in Robert's hand. I wanted you here," Robert told Ned, a raw note in his voice. "I will sign a royal decree. You are the hand. You shall rule in my name until—" He coughed, spattering the cloth near his chin with flecks of blood. "Until I am well again. Or if I die, then, gods help us, but you'll keep order." Cersei's eyes flashed. "That is not the rightful order of succession, my son." "I have no son by you," Robert snarled. For a moment, the anger seemed to give him strength. He reached to the table beside the bed, where a quill and parchment lay. Pycelle had apparently been writing something. "Bring me that," Robert commanded, pointing feebly. A young maester rushed to hand Robert the parchment and quill. Cersei stepped forward. "Robert," he glowered at her, "you dare speak? After what you and your brother—" His voice cut off again in a choking spasm. Maester Pycelle approached, urging the king to lie back, but Robert batted him away. With shaking fingers, Robert scrawled something on the parchment. Each movement seemed to cost him. His breathing rattled. Sweat dripped from his brow and temples, soaking into his dark hair. When he finished, his signature was hardly more than a smear, but it was clearly his. He thrust the paper toward Ned. Ned took it carefully, reading. It was a royal edict naming Ned Stark as protector of the realm and regent, to preserve the crown and the peace until Robert regains his full strength or until a rightful heir can be established. The language was slightly vague, but there was no mention of Joffrey, no mention of naming him heir. Ned's hands shook with the weight of it. Robert tried to speak once more, but his voice faltered. Pycelle rushed in, pressing a cup of milk of the poppy to his lips. "Drink, your grace," the Grand Maester urged. "You must rest, or the fever will worsen." The queen watched, silent, as Robert parted his lips enough for the bitter liquid to pass. Gradually, the tension left the king's features, replaced by a murky haze. His eyes drifted shut, and he slumped back into the cushions. The bandage around his torso was stained with fresh red. Maester Pycelle, looking flustered, turned to Ned. "He must not excite himself. This wound is quite grave. If he reopens it, we can do nothing." Ned nodded grimly. He glanced at Cersei, expecting an outburst, but she only stared at the parchment in Ned's hands, her expression cold and calculating. Then, with a final, dismissive glance at Robert, she pivoted and strode out of the chamber, beckoning for her retinue. The door slammed behind them. Ned stood there, stunned, heart pounding. The king's decree quivered in his hand. Varys, who had been lingering by the wall, glided closer, his slippers silent. The eunuch's face was carefully composed. "Lord Stark, or should I say protector of the realm," he said softly. "The realm will look to you now." Ned barely heard him. His thoughts raced. With Robert's signature, he had legal authority to act. But the Lannisters would not stand aside peacefully. He had to seize the moment, secure the city, and ensure Cersei could not crown her son before Robert either recovered or died. And the queen was sure to fight tooth and nail. He handed the parchment to Pycelle for safekeeping, though a small, suspicious voice warned him that Pycelle, too, had ties to the Lannisters. Nonetheless, Ned had few immediate options. "Lord Varys," Ned said quietly, "gather the city watch commanders here at once. We must ensure the king's orders are followed." Varys bowed. "As you wish, my lord." He slipped away, leaving Ned with the still sleeping Robert. The king's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Ned leaned over the bed, voice trembling. "My friend," he whispered, "I will protect the realm. Seven save us all." He turned and strode from the room, mind ablaze with the steps that needed to be taken. First, he had to find men he could trust. He had some Northerners in his service, but not enough to outmatch the Lannisters. The city watch was a wild card, easily bought if Peter Baelish had plied them with gold. But the king's own edict was strong. If Ned could secure the loyalty of the watch and some key knights, he might hold the Red Keep against the Lannisters. Then, as protector, he could dispatch ravens to Stannis and Renly, calling them south. He could also reach out to Jon Arryn if the man was strong enough to travel, or at least to confirm what Ned had discovered. There was another matter, far more personal: Sansa and Arya. Ned had to ensure their safety before any confrontation began. If the Lannisters seized his daughters as hostages, it would weaken him immeasurably. His gut churned with worry for them. As he left the royal wing, he encountered a swirl of courtiers murmuring in hushed tones. News of Robert's partial recovery had spread, along with rumors of his delirious accusations against the queen. Some men who had once bowed to Ned with courtesy now gave him uncertain looks. Others, especially those known to be in Peter Baelish's circle, eyed him with open distrust. He was hurrying toward the tower that housed his daughter's chambers when a voice called out behind him, "Lord Stark, a moment!" He turned to see Barristan Selmy, the aging but venerable Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, striding purposefully toward him. Ser Barristan's silver hair gleamed in the torchlight, and though he was older, he still carried himself with the grace of a knight half his age. "My lord," Barristan said, inclining his head, "I heard the king roused enough to speak. Is it true he named you protector of the realm?" Ned's eyes flicked around, noticing a few spectators lurking. He lowered his voice. "Yes, signed and sealed." Barristan's face was solemn. "Then I am sworn to defend his decree. I served your friend Jon Arryn faithfully, and I will serve you if that is what the king commands. But I fear you will find little support among the other Kingsguard." His gaze shifted, and Ned understood the warning. Jaime Lannister was also Kingsguard, and others might be sympathetic to the queen. "Thank you, Ser Barristan," Ned said quietly, relief washing over him to have at least one honorable knight on his side. "We must act quickly. The Lannisters will try to seize power now that Robert is incapacitated. The succession is in question." Barristan's lips thinned, but he nodded. "Whatever the king's final word, I will uphold it to my last breath." Ned clasped the older knight's arm gratefully. "I have to see to my daughters," he murmured. "Then I must call a meeting of the city watch. I'll need your presence there, if at all possible. I want them to understand that the highest authority in the realm stands behind me." Barristan agreed without hesitation. "I will attend, my lord." They parted, and Ned pressed on, heading up the winding steps toward the apartments where his daughters stayed. He found 2 Lannister guards posted outside. At Ned's approach, they exchanged uncertain looks. One cleared his throat. "Lord Stark, the Queen placed us here for the young lady's protection." Ned's hand tightened on his sword. "I will see them. Now." The guards glanced at each other, then stepped aside. Perhaps they feared that defying the newly declared protector of the realm would cost them their heads. Ned slipped inside and found Sansa and Arya sitting together on a window seat, both looking pale and anxious. Arya bounded to her feet the moment she saw him, but Sansa hesitated, worry etched on her features. "Father!" Arya exclaimed, rushing forward. She glanced behind him as though expecting more soldiers. "Are we leaving? People keep saying the king is dying, and the queen wants us to stay here." Sansa stood as well, twisting her hands together. "They said Mother might be coming, but I haven't seen any letters." Ned embraced them both, relief surging through him that they were unharmed. "My sweet girls, you are all right?" He scanned the room, checking for any sign of ransacking or threat. The place seemed intact, though ominously quiet. A single handmaid lingered in the far corner, eyes downcast. "We're fine," Arya said, looking up at him with fierce determination. "But they wouldn't let us out." Sansa wanted to visit the Sept, but the Lannister guards said no. Sansa's voice trembled. "What is happening, father? I heard rumors that Prince Joffrey—" She trailed off, color draining from her cheeks. "Is it true what they say? That he's not really the king's son?" Ned did not want to burden his daughters with the ugly truths of betrayal and incest, but Sansa was at an age where half of King's Landing's gossip reached her ears in days. "Matters are complicated," he said quietly, "but you must trust me. You must also do exactly as I say." Arya looked up at him with wide eyes, a flicker of fear behind her youthful bravado. "Are we in danger?" Ned exhaled. "There is danger, yes, but I will keep you safe." He glanced at the door, careful to keep his voice low. "You are to remain here under guard until I send for you. Do not attempt to go out alone. Do not speak to strangers. If the Queen's men try to move you, demand to see me or Ser Barristan. Is that understood?" They nodded, though Arya bristled at the thought of being confined. Sansa swallowed. "Father, what about my betrothal to Joffrey?" Ned closed his eyes briefly, recalling the original plan for Sansa to marry Prince Joffrey. A union meant to unite House Stark and Baratheon, except now that union was rotten to the core. "I promise we'll speak of it soon," he said. "For now, do nothing. Say nothing. You are my daughters, and I love you both. Remain vigilant." He kissed them on their brows. Then, with a final look, he left, instructing the Lannister guards to remain. If they took issue, they said nothing aloud. Ned hurried away, a knot in his stomach. Both girls were effectively hostages. The Lannisters had placed those guards there to control them, not protect them. But removing the guards would provoke Cersei's wrath prematurely. Ned needed more men if he was going to tear down the Queen's hold. He strode through the corridors toward the small council chambers, all the while searching for loyal faces. His own men from the north had been quartered in the barracks near the stables. He passed a pair of them, Jory Castle and Desmond, who greeted him with anxious relief. Ned told them to gather the others discreetly, to stay armed and ready. "We may have to defend ourselves soon," Ned said, low enough that only they could hear. Jory's face hardened. Desmond nodded, and they trotted off to carry out the order. Not long after, Ned reached the small council chambers. Word had spread quickly. Renly Baratheon was there, pacing restlessly. Ser Barristan Selmy arrived only moments after Ned, still in his white cloak. Varys entered next, glancing around with a faint smile. Pycelle appeared, looking flushed and worried. Peter Baelish arrived last, wearing his customary half-smirk. Ned took his seat at the head of the table, aware this was the seat usually occupied by the king. It felt wrong to sit there, yet Robert's decree gave him the authority, and if he meant to project leadership, he could not waver. He laid the folded parchment on the table so all could see the royal seal. "By the king's command," Ned began, "I serve as protector of the realm until he recovers. You will heed my orders, or you shall face the king's wrath. Is that understood?" Renly Baratheon's eyes flicked to the parchment. "Robert truly signed that? We heard he was delirious." "He signed it," Ned said quietly. "He is gravely wounded but lucid enough to know his mind." Renly bit his lip, glancing sidelong at the others. "Then we must honor his will." Pycelle coughed. "Lord Stark, the Queen may—" "The Queen," Ned interrupted, "is subject to the king's command just as we are." Peter Baelish leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Of course, my lord, but the Queen might not see it that way. Word has it she is not one to relinquish power easily. Have you considered the possibility that she will try to crown her son as soon as the king's breath leaves his body?" Ned glared at Baelish, though a grudging part of him recognized the truth in his words. "I have. That's why we must act. Robert's decree states that no one will assume the crown until we determine the rightful heir. If Robert dies, I intend to uphold that." Varys gave a gentle shrug. "You will need the City Watch on your side. Without them, your claim is a piece of parchment." Ned nodded, eyeing Peter. "The Watch are under Lord Baelish's financial influence. Is that not so?" Baelish smiled thinly. "I handle the crown's finances, yes, and I have cultivated relationships with the Watch. But you need not worry, Lord Stark. I will, of course, do what is best for the realm. And if that is supporting you, then so be it." Ned did not trust that for a moment. Baelish would do whatever benefited Baelish. "We will meet with Janos Slynt, the commander of the City Watch, and secure his loyalty," Ned declared. "Once we have that, we will place guards around the Red Keep to prevent the Queen or her men from taking Robert's children or seizing the throne by force." Renly cleared his throat. "I want to see my brother myself. If he's truly near death, we must not leave him alone. The Queen could do anything. Prevent the Maesters from treating him properly." "Agreed," Ned said. "Ser Barristan, if you would arrange a rotation of Kingsguard to ensure Robert is never unprotected." Barristan inclined his head. "As you wish." Pycelle fiddled with his chain of office. "Lord Stark, what of Prince Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen? Are they to be placed under guard as well?" Ned hesitated. Under normal circumstances, they were the king's children, the natural heirs. But the truth of their parentage changed everything. If he seized them, the realm might see it as an act of rebellion against the monarchy, unless Robert openly denounced them. If he left them free, Cersei might whisk them away or have them crowned in secret. "For now, let them remain in their chambers," Ned said slowly. "Ser Barristan, place a loyal Kingsguard outside their doors. Someone not beholden to the Lannisters." Barristan's mouth thinned. "With Jaime in the Kingsguard, that may be difficult. I trust only a few of my brothers implicitly." Ned rubbed his temples, feeling the strain. "Do what you can. I will see if we can find reliable men among the City Watch to help. We must avoid harming the children, no matter what. This is not their fault." Renly's expression hardened. "If Robert recovers, the question is moot. But if he dies, Stannis is the rightful heir. We must send word to Dragonstone at once." Ned considered. "Yes, but we must do so quietly. If Cersei discovers we've contacted Stannis, she might accelerate her plans." Baelish's grin was humorless. "I can send a discreet raven if you like." Ned glowered at him. "I will handle it. You focus on securing the Watch's loyalty." Baelish dipped his head in acceptance, but the look in his eyes was not so yielding. Ned knew Peter had grown used to controlling the City Watch with gold. Slynt was undoubtedly in Baelish's pocket. With luck, Ned could temporarily align Baelish's interests with his own, at least until Robert's fate was decided. But trusting Peter Baelish too far was as wise as trusting a viper not to strike. They adjourned. Pycelle bustled out, anxious to return to the king's sickroom. Renly marched off to see Robert as well. Barristan went to gather the Kingsguard. That left Ned with Varys and Baelish. The three men stood outside the chamber in a moment's awkward stillness. Torchlight flickered across their faces. "Well," Baelish said softly, "what an interesting turn of events. You hold the realm in your hand, Lord Stark. Let us hope you do not drop it." Ned tensed. "Why would I drop it?" Baelish shrugged. A small, condescending movement. "If you press too hard, the queen might lash out. Let me handle her in my own way behind the scenes. My coin can buy us time, keep her from unleashing the Lannister swords. Perhaps we can avoid a messy war. You do want peace, yes?" Ned measured his words. "Peace is my foremost goal, but not at the cost of justice. Robert's word is law. If he dies, we must see his wishes carried out." Baelish bowed with mocking grace. "As you command, protector of the realm." Then he drifted away, silent as a cat in the corridor. That left Varys, who watched Ned with an air of sympathetic curiosity. "Do be careful, my lord," the eunuch intoned. "There are many knives in the dark." Ned said nothing. Varys gave a short bow and departed as well. Ned let out a long breath, feeling the weight of it all on his shoulders. He had thought the responsibilities of Warden of the North were burdensome, but they paled in comparison to this swirling pit of ambition and deceit. He headed for the courtyard. The sun was climbing higher, bathing the city in a haze of heat. He found Janos Slynt at last near the barracks, engaged in a heated conversation with some of his captains. The commander was a stocky man with cunning eyes, always shifting his weight as though uneasy. When he saw Ned approaching with half a dozen Stark men, he made a show of bowing deeply. "Lord Stark," Janos Slynt said, "how may the city watch be of service?" Ned nodded curtly. "From this day forward, the city watch is under my direct command, by order of the king. I will need you to position your men around the Red Keep and secure every entrance. No one is to come or go without my authorization. The safety of the king is paramount." Slynt's lips twitched. "The queen has given us instructions already, my lord. Are you contradicting her?" Ned pulled out the king's decree and held it up for Slynt to see. "This is the official seal and signature of King Robert. He named me protector of the realm. That outranks any instructions the queen might have given. Am I clear?" Slynt scanned the parchment, then looked at Ned's stern face. "Of course, my lord. We serve the crown. If the king signed it, so be it." Ned studied him carefully, searching for any sign of betrayal. Slynt's compliance was too smooth, too pat. But for now, that was enough. "Very good," Ned said. "I want a full roster of every watchman on duty. You and your captains will meet me this evening for further orders." Slynt sketched another bow. "As you command." He spared a glance at Baelish's men, who loitered across the courtyard, presumably placed there by Peter to keep an eye on the watch. Ned hoped he could trust Slynt for the next few crucial days. If not, he would have to remove him from command, but that might spark open confrontation before Ned was ready. He parted ways with Slynt, his thoughts churning. In the following hours, Ned directed his Northmen to key positions, quietly replacing Lannister-loyal guards where he could. He had far fewer men, though, and the Red Keep was large. One slip and a Lannister force could break through. If only Jon Arryn were here with the Vale's knights. If only Stannis Baratheon or even Renly could call up a proper army. But time was the critical factor now. Robert might breathe his last at any hour. Throughout the day, Ned received multiple messages. From Renly, from Barristan, even from Pycelle, all relaying updates on Robert's condition. The king drifted in and out of consciousness. The fever burned, and the wound festered. Each time he woke, he demanded wine to dull the pain. Pycelle tried to reduce his intake, but Robert cursed him. Cersei hovered near, or so the maids said, though the tension in the king's chamber was as thick as smoke. By dusk, Ned was exhausted but had no time to rest. He convened again with Slint and the captains of the watch in the small council chambers. Baelish showed up as well, uninvited, wearing a mild smile. One by one, the captains confirmed that they had stationed men around the Red Keep, though the Lannister household knights also maintained a strong presence. Ned suspected that, in a clash, it could go either way. He gave his instructions. If any man attempts to remove the royal children from the castle, you are to stop them. If the Queen attempts to declare Prince Joffrey king, you are to wait on my word before acknowledging it. The king's own decree supersedes any other command. Is that clear? The captains murmured assent, though with varying degrees of conviction. Janos Slint nodded vigorously. Of course, Lord Stark. When the meeting was adjourned, Baelish lingered again. You grow bolder, my lord, he remarked, hooking his thumbs through his belt. Be careful not to overreach. The Queen will not sit idle forever. Ned turned on him. Nor will I. I've had my fill of this cat-and-mouse dance. The law is on my side. She can protest all she likes, but so long as Robert lives, and this decree stands, the realm must heed me. Baelish's eyes flicked with amusement. And if Robert dies tonight, the moment that happens, you will have no piece of paper strong enough to hold back the tide. The Queen will claim the throne in her son's name. She has Lannister gold, Lannister swords. You have the City Watch precariously loyal. He shrugged. You must consider every possibility. Ned tightened his jaw. He loathed that Baelish was right about the precariousness of it all. But he would not yield. I will see this through. Baelish gave a theatrical sigh. Very well. Then let us both pray King Robert recovers. With a final mocking bow, he left Ned alone in the council chamber. In the quiet that followed, Ned sank into a chair, rubbing at his temples. He thought of writing a letter to Catelyn in Winterfell, begging her to muster forces. But that would take weeks to bear fruit, and civil war might erupt in days or hours. Still, he resolved to send the Raven anyway. The North must know what was happening. If war came, they would stand with him no matter how much blood the Lannisters spilled. He rose, intent on heading to the rookery. But as he stepped into the corridor, he nearly collided with Ser Barristan, who looked grave. My lord, Barristan said, eyes darting about. The king has worsened. Pycelle claims his wound seeps foul-smelling fluids. They have tried to treat the infection, but... A cold dread settled over Ned. I must see him. Barristan nodded. Come quickly, but be warned. The Queen and Prince Joffrey are there. They hurried toward the royal chambers. The corridor was lined with Lannister guards, wearing their red cloaks and lion crests openly. Barristan gave them a curt nod, and they grudgingly parted to let Ned through. Inside, the air was stifling with the scent of sickness and hot candles. Robert lay in bed, eyes half-lidded, sweat pouring down his face. Cersei stood at his side, patting his brow with a cloth, though her expression was impassive. Joffrey hovered behind her, glowering. Pycelle and the younger maesters worked frantically, applying salves and potions. Ned saw no sign of improvement. The king's face was gaunt, his lips cracked. He mumbled, "No, no," as if beset by fever dreams. His left hand twitched, as though trying to grasp something that was not there. Cersei turned when Ned entered. Have you come to watch him die? Ned stifled a surge of anger. I have come to see my friend and my king. She scoffed softly, stepping away from the bed. He is beyond speaking now. If you wish to pray over him, do so. But your days are numbered, Stark. When he dies, all your claims die with him. Joffrey stared at Ned with bright, angry eyes, but said nothing. Barristan moved to Robert's other side, kneeling to check his pulse. The king's eyelids fluttered. Ned bowed his head, fighting to keep his voice steady. Robert, I am here. He touched his friend's shoulder, feeling the heat of fever through the bandages. The dying king let out a strangled breath, but did not open his eyes. Ned looked to Pycelle. Is there nothing you can do? Pycelle shook his head gravely. I have tried every known remedy, my lord. The boar's tusk pierced deep. The infection is unstoppable. If the gods will it, there may be a miracle, but it is unlikely. A strangled laugh sounded from the bed. Robert was awake, or half so. He muttered something about wine, demanded it. A maester complied, letting him sip from a cup. The queen watched with hawkish intensity, as though measuring every drop. Robert swallowed, coughed, and lay back, eyes distant. "War," he croaked. "They'll tear the realm apart." Then his gaze flicked, unfocused, but seemingly aimed in Ned's direction. "Stop them, Ned. Keep the peace." Ned gripped Robert's sweaty hand, tears burning behind his eyes. "I will try, my friend. I promise." Cersei's voice cut coldly through the moment. "Move aside. He needs rest." Ned glanced up at her, fury twisting his gut. But Robert's grip slackened, and his eyes slid shut. He drifted into what seemed a deep, uneasy sleep. The maesters tried to wipe away the sweat, but more poured forth. Barristan stood, face carved with sorrow. "I fear we are losing him." Ned's heart hammered. He thought of everything left undone. Stannis not summoned, the city watch uncertain, the children in the castle. A tide of panic threatened to overwhelm him. He breathed in, steadying himself. "We must be prepared for the worst," he said quietly. "Barristan, stay with the king. Keep vigil." He bowed once, out of respect for his friend, then walked away from the bedside. Cersei stepped into his path, Joffrey at her side. "When he dies," the queen said in a low, dangerous tone, "I will not permit you to claim power. You may cling to that piece of parchment, but the realm will see Joffrey crowned. Jaime is riding with men loyal to House Lannister. If you dare try to steal my son's birthright, you will face an army. And your Northmen are weeks away." Ned felt his anger rise. He squared his shoulders. "It is no birthright if the child is not Robert's." Joffrey let out a snarl, lunging forward. "Lies! I'll have your head." Cersei gripped her son's arm, restraining him. "In time, my sweet. There is no need to kill him here." She turned that icy gaze back on Ned. "Pray that Robert survives, Stark. For your sake. Because if he dies, I will ensure your daughters watch you kneel before the executioner's block." Ned refused to flinch. "I have made my choice. I'll stand for Robert's wishes until my last breath." She stared at him a long moment, then stepped aside, letting him pass. Ned left the room without another word, though Joffrey's outraged glare followed him. In the corridor, the Lannister guards parted for him, albeit grudgingly. Once he was away from their hostile eyes, Ned pressed a hand to his chest, almost surprised to feel his heart still pounding there. He had seen the venom in Cersei's face, the willingness to murder. There would be no compromise now, no secret arrangement or peace. This was heading toward confrontation as surely as the sun rose in the east. Outside, twilight was deepening. Ned breathed in the cooler air, the looming night seeming to echo his dread. If Robert died tonight, the next dawn might see the realm fractured. Cersei would try to proclaim Joffrey king, while Ned, with Robert's decree in hand, would call for Stannis. Sides would be chosen, swords drawn. Jon Arryn was alive but absent, too ill to help. Baelish circled like a fox around the henhouse. The city watch might or might not stand with Ned when steel clashed with steel. And through it all, Ned found his thoughts turning to Jon Arryn's initial suspicions. So many weeks ago. Had Jon never been poisoned? Had he never been taken from the game board? He and Robert together might have forced the truth into the open before the Lannisters consolidated their power. Now, the entire realm teetered because one good man had been struck down too soon. Ned prayed that Jon might still recover enough to speak, to confirm all Ned had discovered. Perhaps that would sway the uncertain lords. Yet the chance was small, overshadowed by the merciless reality of war. He walked to the rookery alone, the castle corridors dimly lit by torches. Once there, he found the Master of Ravens, a withered old man half-blind in one eye. Ned requested parchment and quill, ignoring the man's quizzical look. He wrote 2 letters, one for Catelyn in Winterfell, the other for Stannis Baratheon on Dragonstone. He explained the situation, omitting the ugliest details but making it clear that the Lannisters were staging a coup, that the king was gravely ill, and that Ned was named protector of the realm. He urged them to gather forces and be ready for anything. He sealed both letters with the Stark direwolf, praying that they would not be intercepted. The old man took them without question, shuffling to the caged ravens. Ned watched as they were attached to the birds and released into the night sky. The faint beating of wings faded, leaving him alone with his apprehension. When Ned emerged again, he found the courtyard nearly empty. Slynt had posted a few watchmen here and there, but otherwise the keep felt eerily still. Only the occasional clink of armor or flicker of torchlight hinted at the men on patrol. Ned rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion gnawing at him, but he knew sleep was impossible. He made his way to his own chambers, hoping to at least catch his breath. The moment he stepped inside, he noticed a figure by the window, a slender silhouette in the gloom. Ned's hand shot to his sword, but then the figure turned, and the faint light revealed Petyr Baelish. The man's sly grin was visible even in the half-dark. "You keep an unwise door guard, my lord," Baelish murmured. "Or perhaps your men let me in. Either way, I thought we might speak in private." Ned scowled, releasing his grip on the sword. "You take too many liberties." Baelish shrugged. "I take precisely the liberties that suit me. The real question is, how do they suit you?" Ned crossed the chamber, setting a candle alight. Its flicker pushed back the shadows, revealing Petyr's fine doublet and the mocking glint in his eyes. "Speak your piece quickly," Ned said, "before I call for the guards." Baelish inclined his head with mocking courtesy. "As you command. I am here to offer you a plan that might spare us all a great deal of bloodshed." Ned's lips thinned. "I doubt that, but talk." Baelish settled against a table. "Let us assume the king dies. Tonight, tomorrow, it matters not. Cersei will move to crown Joffrey, you will brand him illegitimate. Conflict. War. The city watch will be crucial, yes." "Yes," Ned said curtly. Baelish lifted a hand. "I can buy the loyalty of the watch for you, completely and without question. Janos Slynt follows gold. He's always followed gold, and I hold his purse strings. If I command him to place the watch under your sole authority, he will do so. When the queen tries to install Joffrey, the watch will seize the Red Keep in your name. That means you can arrest the queen, neutralize her men, and control the city without a major battle. The Lannisters might rage, but they won't be able to seize the capital." Ned eyed Baelish warily. "And in exchange?" Petyr's smile was cunning. "Oh, a few trifling boons. Perhaps a favorable position in the new regime. Say, you name me master of coin for life with certain freedoms to manage the treasury as I see fit. A beneficial arrangement for both of us, truly." Ned's stomach twisted. Baelish's offer was straightforward blackmail. "Let me profit and I will hand you the city. You want to keep your little empire of bribes and brothels unimpeded," Ned said. "You want me to turn a blind eye while you bleed the treasury. That is your price for ensuring peace." Baelish chuckled softly. "Peace is never free, my lord, and gold is a powerful tool. Without it, Slynt might waffle at the crucial moment. Your parchment is worthless if his men do not obey. Think on it. The queen is cunning, but you hold the moral high ground. With me, you can also hold the practical high ground. I shall not demand an immediate answer, but I'll give you one now," Ned spat. "No, I will not sell the realm's integrity for your gold. If Janos Slynt wavers, I'll find another commander, or I'll fight my own battles." Baelish sighed, as though speaking to a child who refused reason. "You are a stubborn fool, Ned Stark. War will come, thousands will die, and your daughters could be among them. Ask yourself if your northern sense of honor is worth that." Ned's anger flared white-hot. He stormed across the chamber, closing the distance until he stood nearly nose to nose with Baelish. "Do not speak of my daughters," he growled, "or I'll feed your tongue to the crows." Petyr's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, some genuine alarm flickered there. Then he recovered his composure. "Your threats do not frighten me, Lord Stark. I act for the realm's sake, and my own. If you will not be pragmatic, so be it. I offered you an easy path. You have chosen the hard one." Before Ned could respond, Baelish slipped around him with cat-like swiftness, opening the door. In the dim corridor, a pair of guards startled at his sudden appearance. Peter smiled at them, then glanced back at Ned. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me," he said, and vanished into the hallway. Ned slammed the door, fury boiling. He sank onto a bench, breathing heavily. Baelish's proposition was repulsive, yet it pointed to the heart of the problem. Power in King's Landing often belonged to whoever could pay the men with swords. Morality meant little. The realm might truly plunge into war because Ned would not stoop to Baelish's treachery. He ran a hand through his hair. So be it. Robert's decree was the law, and Ned was its custodian. He would not stoop to corruption or blackmail. He would do this the right way or not at all. War might be inevitable if the Lannisters refused to stand down. Late into the night, Ned remained in his chambers, poring over the genealogies Jon Arryn had left behind. The notes scrawled in the margins, the references to the seed is strong. It all led to the same conclusion. Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen were not Roberts. Jaime was their father. The king's line was broken. Stannis was next in line by blood, though Ned found himself also wondering about Renly. The younger Baratheon brother had a knack for charm. People might rally to him more easily than to Stannis. But the law was the law. He dozed off at some point, exhaustion taking him. His dreams were fitful and dark. Images of Robert's coronation twisted into scenes of blood-soaked battles, Lannister lions devouring direwolves, Peter Baelish whispering false promises, and in the distance, Jon Arryn's voice echoing, telling Ned to be wary. Near dawn, Jory Castle woke him with an urgent knock. Ned jerked upright, wiping the haze from his eyes. "What is it, Jory?" "Lord Stark," Jory said breathlessly, stepping inside. "The king's fever broke in the night. He's awake, properly awake. He wants you." For a moment, Ned's heart soared with hope. If Robert had recovered enough to speak clearly, they might yet avert war. Then he saw the dread in Jory's eyes. "What else?" Jory lowered his voice. "They say the queen is with him already. She barred entry to the rest." Ned cursed softly, rising. He snatched up his sword belt and followed Jory into the corridor. This was the moment he realized the final crossroads. If Robert was truly lucid again, he could confirm his decree and denounce Joffrey's claim, or he could yield to Cersei's manipulations. Perhaps she had threatened or cajoled him in his weakened state. As they hurried toward the king's chambers, the hallway was congested with gold cloaks, Lannister guards, and a smattering of watchers. Renly was there, standing with fists clenched, apparently denied entry. "He's my brother," Renly hissed at one of the guards. "Let me pass." Jaime Lannister stood by the doors, helm tucked under one arm, a smirk upon his lips. "He is also the queen's husband, and she does not want you disturbing him." Ned arrived, breathless. "Step aside, Lannister." Jaime chuckled. "The queen's orders stand. The king's orders supersede them," Ned snapped. "Do you defy the protector of the realm?" Jaime's smirk wavered. He glanced back at the door. At length he gave a mocking bow. "I suppose not, but do not say I didn't warn you if the queen objects." He stepped aside, and the guards parted just enough for Ned to slip through. Renly followed, ignoring Jaime's glare. Within the bedchamber, the morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating the bed where Robert lay propped on cushions. He looked feverish still, but his eyes were open, and color had returned to his face. Cersei stood at his side, one hand lightly resting on his shoulder, her expression unreadable. Joffrey lurked by the foot of the bed, hands clasped. Pycelle hovered near, while Varys stood a discreet distance away. Robert turned his head when Ned entered. Their eyes met. The king's face twisted, half in pain, half in recognition. "Ned?" Cersei's grip tightened on him, but Robert groaned, trying to sit up straighter. Let him come. Ned approached, Renly at his shoulder. He bowed his head, heart pounding. Your Grace, I am relieved to see you awake. Robert's voice was hoarse. I may not be for long. Damn bore. Blame me for being half drunk. He coughed, wincing. Then his gaze flicked to Joffrey. Tell me, boy, did you let your mother usurp my rightful authority? Joffrey's cheeks reddened. Father, I only... Silence, Robert growled. He turned back to Ned. I named you protector. I want it done. The realm, it must know. Ned felt a surge of vindication. Yes, your Grace. If you say the word, we can have your decree proclaimed at once. Cersei exhaled, stepping in. Robert, my love, you are confused. You named him protector in a delirium. You cannot truly mean to... Robert cut her off with a snarl. Don't call me that again. Gods, woman, you and your scheming. Ned told me the truth before I went on that hunt. I was half crazed with anger, and now I see it was well-founded. He pointed a trembling finger at Joffrey. That boy is no son of mine. Joffrey's face contorted with shock and rage. Mother, he's mad. He... Silence, Robert bellowed, which sent him into a fit of coughing. The spasm ended in a gasp for air, and Pycelle hurried to offer him a damp cloth. Cersei's eyes were wide, her knuckles white where she gripped the bed frame. Robert, you have no proof. You base this on scribblings in an old book. Do not let these paranoid fantasies ruin the realm. Robert sneered. I have all the proof I need, my own eyes. The hair color of my bastards. Jaime's face in that boy. He shuddered. 7 hells, I was blind. Joffrey looked on the brink of a meltdown, tears of fury at the corners of his eyes. Cersei, taking a sharp breath, tried a different tactic. Your Grace, even if that were so, the realm will not accept any other heir. They have seen Joffrey raised as your son for 13 years. If you tear him down now, the lords of Westeros will riot. Renly stepped forward, voice resonant. Better the truth be known than a lie upheld. Or do you fear justice, your Grace? He asked Cersei, deliberately using the honorific ironically. She glared at him. Robert, eyes blazing with pained determination, lifted a hand. Summon Stannis, he rasped. He is my heir now. Protector, yes, Ned, you serve until Stannis arrives. Then, you two can do whatever is needed. I wash my hands of this mess. If I survive, I'll retire to Storm's End, or the Summer Isles, or the 7 Bloody Hells, I don't care. He slumped back, sweat dripping. Take them away. The Queen, Joffrey. I won't look at them. Cersei's face twisted, all composure gone. You would cast me aside? After all these years? Robert laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. You cast yourself aside when you spread your legs for your brother. Joffrey shrieked, Guards! But the door was closed. Jaime might be outside, but inside was only Ned's small group, plus Pycelle and Varys. Cersei's desperation flared. She looked to Pycelle, but the old man was stammering, uncertain. She looked to Varys, who simply lowered his gaze. She looked to Ned, hatred gleaming in her eyes. You think you've won? Ned said nothing. He stepped to the side, gesturing to Renly to stand ready. Robert's breathing was ragged, but his voice held. Take them away, he repeated. Lock them in their chambers until I can think. His eyelids fluttered. Go, let me rest. For a moment no one moved. Then Cersei lunged, her hand diving under the bed's edge. Ned realized too late she must have hidden a dagger there. Steel gleamed as she brandished it at Robert's exposed neck. Pycelle cried out, while Joffrey stumbled back in shock. But Robert was a warrior, even in his weakened state. With a roar, he thrust his left arm up, grabbing her wrist, forcing it away from his throat. The bedclothes tore, and the wound in his side bled anew, but he held her at bay, teeth gritted. Ned leapt forward, grappling for the dagger. Together, he and Robert wrenched it free from Cersei's hand. She screamed, twisting away as Renly caught her, pinning her arms. Robert gasped, eyes rolling with pain, and collapsed back onto the cushions. Ned cast the dagger aside, panting. Joffrey shrieked, lunging as if to help his mother, but a firm grip from Varys, surprisingly strong for a eunuch, held him back. Cersei snarled, hissing curses at them, her hair disheveled, eyes ablaze. "You fool!" she spat at Robert. "You'd condemn us all, brand your son a bastard. For what? Honor." Robert coughed, spitting blood, his face ashen. "He is not my son," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Gods have mercy on me for being blind. Ned, see it done." Ned nodded, though his heart ached to see Robert so broken. The king's eyes fluttered shut, and the maesters rushed in, pressing cloths to his side. The wound had reopened, and a crimson stain spread across the bandages. Ned swallowed hard, focusing on the immediate crisis. He turned to Renly, who still held Cersei's arms tight. "Remove her from here," Ned ordered. "Take the boy too. Put them under guard." Renly nodded, motioning for two of the gold cloaks who had followed them in. They seized Joffrey and forced him toward the door. Joffrey struggled, screaming threats of vengeance. Cersei glared at Ned with unbridled hatred, but no words could form on her lips. She spat, a wordless cry of rage, as they dragged her away. The bedchamber fell quiet except for Robert's ragged breathing and the frantic efforts of Pycelle and the other maesters to stanch the bleeding. Varys released a long, shaky exhale, stepping aside. Ned stood over Robert, who looked near unconsciousness. "Hold on, Robert," Ned murmured. "We will see justice done." Robert's eyes opened faintly. "Too late for me. I can feel it," he coughed, crimson spattering his lips. "But the realm, perhaps not too late." A long, rattling breath. "Jon Arryn, if only I should have listened to him sooner." The maesters lifted Robert slightly, trying to apply pressure to the wound, but the smell of infection was overwhelming. "We must close this," one of them said in a quavering tone. "But I fear it may be beyond saving." Time slowed. Ned watched Robert's eyes roll back, his breathing falter. Pycelle pressed a cloth to the king's chest, but blood seeped through. Varys hovered, his face pale and grim. Barristan Selmy burst in, sword drawn. Too late. With one final, tortured breath, Robert Baratheon, king of the Seven Kingdoms, parted from life. Ned staggered, feeling as though he had been stabbed himself. He had come south to protect his friend, to serve him, to root out the Lannisters' lies. Instead, Robert lay dead, felled by a boar's tusk and treacherous circumstances. The maesters bowed their heads. Barristan sank to one knee, sorrow etched on his features. Varys muttered a soft lament, though his eyes were already flicking about, no doubt calculating the next move. Ned felt a rush of cold clarity. Robert was gone, but the realm's fight was just beginning. He brushed Robert's forehead in a final gesture of farewell. The king's skin was still warm, and the memory of his boisterous laughter, his thunderous presence, clashed cruelly with this silent form. Then Ned straightened, pushing aside grief. He had a duty. "Ser Barristan," he said firmly, "gather the Kingsguard. We have a new threat. The Queen and Joffrey are under arrest for treason and attempted murder of the king. Renly is detaining them, but we must ensure they do not escape." Barristan looked stricken but nodded. "Yes, my lord, my protector." Ned set his jaw. "We declare the throne vacant until the rightful heir, Stannis Baratheon, can be crowned. The City Watch shall keep order until that time." Varys dipped his head in a show of compliance. "As you say, my lord." But in his eyes, Ned saw 1,000 possibilities swirling. And somewhere in the castle, Peter Baelish was no doubt plotting a countermove. Ned Stark inhaled, forcing his voice to steady. "Robert's last command stands. I am protector of the realm. Summon the small council. We will proclaim it officially." He turned to gaze upon his friend one last time. "I pray the gods guide me to do better by the realm than I did by you, Robert." Then he turned on his heel, cloak swaying behind him. The game was far from over. Jon Arryn's initial discovery, which had nearly cost him his life, had now exposed the Lannister treachery for all to see. Ned could only hope that this bold stand would prevent further catastrophe. But with the Queen in custody, Jaime Lannister free, Tywin Lannister in the west, and Peter Baelish weaving his intrigues, the conflicts to come would test every ounce of resolve he possessed. Thus began a new dawn in King's Landing, one stained by blood and overshadowed by the threat of war. The memory of Jon Arryn's integrity and Robert Baratheon's once mighty friendship lent Ned the strength to press on. He would not fail this time. He would see the rightful king crowned, or die in the attempt. If the Seven Kingdoms were to be spared a brutal civil war, the truth must stand, no matter how many swords the Lannisters might raise. And though the path ahead promised more violence, Ned Stark vowed to walk it with honor unbroken, for the good of the realm, and for the friend he had lost.